Scotland, the SNP, suffered a hammering, with Labour increasing their seats from just 1 to 37. Labour also did well in Wales, where Plaid Cymru won 4 seats. Sinn Féin emerged as the largest party in Northern Ireland with 7 MPs. World leaders have congratulated Sir Keir Starmer as Britain's new Prime Minister. The Irish Taoiseach Simon Harris said Dublin would match Sir Keir's commitment to the peace process and that it was time for a great reset. President Macron of France said his country would continue to work with Britain for peace and security in Europe. BBC News.
This is Radio 4. Our green-fingered experts are standing by to give us some advice on growing our own fruit this summer. And then at 4:45, it's the finale of our investigative series, Buried. This afternoon, the team explore a witness's evidence after he claims that a chemical had contaminated the food chain. The last witness concludes after a trip to the South Coast with Cathy Clugston and team. Hello, a warm welcome to Gardener's Question Time from beautiful Exeter in Devon, a county known for its lush greenery, rich biodiversity, and coastlines that boast an incredible range of wildlife. Around Exeter, residents benefit from stunning water meadows, deep shady lanes lined with elms, oaks, and elms. Fine trio of specimens, not unlike our GPT panel. They are also strong, intelligent, enduring, occasionally spiky. Please welcome the evergreen Chris Beardshaw, the classic Christine Walkden, and our timeless Norfolk native Bob Lardew. We are in St. David's Church in Exeter, so without further ado, let's have our first question.
Hello, I'm Jess Campbell from Exeter. I have a 5-year-old Fuji Beardshaw, single-raised bed. It's tied to a 6-foot garden fence. It's growing rampantly. Last year, I had lilies on it for the first time. How can I keep it healthy?
This was voiced for the idea that
Planted on a slightly raised bank as the garden is waterlogged in winter. It's been in for about 5 years, but it's hardly grown. The leaves keep going yellow, black spots, and then falling off. Interestingly, the leaves of the Brahmiapple also curl up towards. What do you think is wrong?
Wonderful. Panel, Jill has very kindly provided a photograph of Christopher Hammond. Very studiously there. Describe what you're seeing.
Well, there's a selection of photographs. There's the tree with underplanted, which looks like, dare I say, it's slightly weedy, rough area. And the patches a non-start. Yeah. I wonder about competition there for a start. You've then got a leaf of the distorted Bramley apple tree. There's two different problems going on here. One with the apple tree and one with the fascia. Rather fascinatingly, I can't see any black growth or anything on the fascia. In all the years that I've been gardening, I've never seen black spots on the fascia. I am wondering if the aphid, because I think the distortions of the Bramley trees is an aphid infection. I wonder if they're excreting honeydew, and that's attracting sticky mold and fungi on them. The yellowing, I suspect, is just lack of nutrients because of the tree and the competition. The fascia will grow in shade and quite dense shade quite successfully. I think it's just the wrong position. There's not too much competition and not enough sort of TLC there, I think.
Should you move that?
Yeah, I think I would move the fascia. Yeah, as far as treating the Bramley apple tree, I mean, people say spray it. How on earth are you going to spray the 30-year tree? You don't. Learn to do with it. And do you get apples from it?
We do. They had last year, both our cooking apples and our eaters had quite a lot of holes in which I had a slide. But anyway, something like that. But and can I just say, interestingly, I've got a Fatsia spider's web a few metres away under a goat willow, which is thriving. As happy as Larry, but the japonica for some reason.
Spiders web is also a relatively new one. Silver variegation, silvery, the partly in the deep area, green in order to grow. And that's an example of the standard one is.
Yeah, it's the second garden I tried to that's japonica. I had to get rid of it because the other one literally just turned up and died completely. So that one doesn't show many spots at the moment, but as the season goes on, it tends to get worse.
I think that's what happens in this part of the world. It's not somewhere else. It may be that you say it's right there.
Well, that's the area of the garden. We've got incredibly high water table. We have a stream on to the garden, very high water table. So I built on a raising bank all the way along so the plants and ground and so on out of the water level.
It wouldn't like its root being wet. That would make very absolutely. Now, what we've got in the front is one of the classic, one of the biggest, most hungry trees there is, and it runs short of potash. And really, without any doubt, if this tree had over potash, it would perform better. And it might actually be the problem that the shortage of potash has made this miserable. So, I'm the same thing at other birds. If it doesn't look really worth doing that, I'll buy another one because they're not expensive. And maybe the potash is really grand and expensive, or certainly not that.
That's a neat to Jill, thank you. Let's take our next question, please.
Hello, my name's Louise Cunnington. I recently moved to a house in Exeter. It's actually on to Silver, and I've never had a garden before, so I'm quite excited. But we have some overgrown, it's a variegated laurel bush outside our front of our house, and it seems to attract a lot of flies. And I'd like to replace it with something that would give all-round clear interest.
Thanks, Louise. Little Silver's Square, just near this church here in Exeter, isn't it, with the community garden at the front. But you have this little patch in front of your house. Here's the photograph, Chris, if you want to pass that along and just take a look. What might be put in there instead? What is the ocean?
So we're just exploring the photograph, and it's a kind of mound, mushroom, rounded-looking thing. It's about, I would guess, look at, because you've taken a photograph with it against the window, I would guess that it's around about 6 feet wide. And there's this whole cosmos of life beneath our feet, a network of roots giving out and taking in information, communicating with fungi and with one another. And just like leaves and flowers, roots come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and getting to know their likes and dislikes, well, that's crucial for a successful gardening.
Yeah, so roots
So they're there for
Why? Give me a reason.
plants that stable and upright, and also taking
Can you search what MP do that?
but to think about how they grow, let's go back to some
YouTube? On YouTube.
So there are different forms of root growth. So we have what's called primary growth, and that's from something called the root apical meristem. That's basically the tip. And we also have secondary growth, and this is from something called the lateral meristem, and that's from something that listeners may be familiar with. That's the canthus. That's the side of the clover that comes to our bones base. And this is all controlled by plant hormones. So I mean, walk us into a root. So if you can imagine a root large enough that you can walk into, the first root you'd enter would be something called the cortex. This is the sort of the packing tissue around the outside. And then beyond that, you'd reach a wall, and that's what we call the endodermis. And behind the endodermis, that's where the plumbing is. These are the pipes that we call xylem and phloem that transport the water and nutrients around the plant.
what are the different types of roots?
It might be helpful to think of the basics as a plant classification, and then we can delve through the soil surface and look at these different types of roots. We often talk on GCT about
Yeah, if
you guys.
you can put it to the Wi-Fi. My Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. Go.
50 years later, Simon de Montfort, for the first time, invited representatives of the towns and shires to his 1265 Parliament. These events established the foundations for the representative democracy we have today. From this point onwards, the power to make decisions for the nation passed over time from the monarch to Parliament. Let's take a closer look at the UK Parliament today. Parliament is made up of three parts: the House of Commons, the House of Lords, and the Monarch. The House of Commons is the elected chamber of Parliament. It debates big issues, passes laws, amends existing ones, and challenges the government's work. There are 650 members of Parliament, or MPs, each represent a constituency in the UK. They belong to either a political party or are independent, and they're elected by constituents of the area they wish to represent. The leader of the party that has the most MPs elected after the general election becomes the Prime Minister and heads up the government. They choose a cabinet made of 20 senior ministers who coordinate each phase of the Parliament's work. Parties not in power are called the opposition. MPs from the opposition and government question the government and seek to make laws. The Speaker keeps the House in order by chairing these debates. The House of Lords is the second chamber and shares the shaping the laws of the House of Commons. It has around 800 members, and it's made up mostly of light peers. It also includes hereditary peers and bishops. Lords are selected for their knowledge and experience and hold government to account by using their expertise to look at laws and issues in detail. The monarch's role is mainly ceremonial. They meet the Prime Minister once a week to hear what's going on in the Parliament and formally agree to the law. But that's not all. There are also people working behind the scenes who support the work of Parliament: clerks, librarians, researchers, and many more. The government has been elected to run the country, and Parliament holds the government to account for us, the public. But how? Prime Minister's questions and ministerial questions give MPs and Lords the opportunity to challenge the government's policies. It's in these debates that they can share the views of their constituents and the public on how new policies may affect them. Another important way Parliament can scrutinise or look in detail at the work of government is through select committees. Select committees analyse and scrutinise policy. They're made up of either MPs, Lords, or a mixture of both. Together, committee members look at a particular subject and make recommendations on improvements. Witnesses with expertise in the area of scrutiny are called evidence, which is used to help shape the committee's inquiry. Members of the public, you, with a view on the subject, also give evidence for consideration. At the end of an inquiry, the committee writes a report with recommendations that the government usually responds to within 60 days.
About what evidence?
Both houses in Parliament share responsibility.
What's best for the public, and they pass laws, design laws, amend laws, and amend existing laws.
Where the laws come from in the first place. Well, it's a proposal for a new law or to change an existing law. It comes from lots of places, like governing and opposition parties, public inquiries, civil servants, or campaign groups. So how does an idea get turned into a law? Imagine the government wanted to place greater controls on the internet. A proposal called the Green Paper is published, which presents the government's ideas for future policy. This is handled by a discussion with interested groups, internet service providers, and others likely to be affected. Once findings are gathered, a white paper is published, which outlines a firmer plan for government policy. Cabinet ministers must agree whether the proposal is taken forward. Once agreed, a bill is brought. The minister responsible for policy introduces the bill to Parliament for debate. MPs and members of the House of Lords comment on the debate or amend the bill through several stages. At the end of the process, apart from very rare circumstances, it must be approved by all houses. It's then passed to the monarch, whose report or consent the bill becomes law or an act of Parliament. In the UK, we live in a democracy, which means power is in the hands of the people who have the right to vote. Throughout history, lots of people in the UK campaigned for the voting rights we have today. There are lots of different types of elections to vote in: general, local, European. Let's take a closer look at how MPs are elected to the House of Commons through the general election. General elections take place in the UK usually once every 3 years, and every seat is up for grabs. On polling day, voters make a chosen list of candidates. The candidate with the most votes then becomes their constituency's MP. Okay, but how would I know who to vote for? Before elections, candidates need to campaign to get people to vote for them. Campaigning can involve talking to leaflets, speaking in public debates, talking to people during political visits, articulating broadcasts. Parties standing for election push a declaration of their policies during the campaign or a manifesto. Once elected, an MP represents all their constituents, even those that they lose or voters voted for the cabinet. The party with the most MPs elected forms the government. Their leader becomes Prime Minister. And if there's a hung parliament or there's no clear winner, then a minority government or a coalition government may be erected or special election held. One way to have a say in how the country is run is to use your vote. You have to be 18 or older to vote in general elections, but you can register from the age of 16. There are lots of other ways to get involved and have your voice there, whatever your age. Remember?
No? No, no.
Hello, my name is Tim Gorton. I'm the Member of Parliament for East Worthing and Shoreham in West Sussex. I've had the privilege of representing the people there since 1997, so I've just celebrated more than 25 years as a Member of Parliament. So what on earth does a Member of Parliament do? Many people often ask that. Well, I have more than 90,000 boxes of all those people who live in the Ada district and reports wards of Worthing. My job is to represent them and their interests, both in Parliament and in the constituency. One of the great parts of Worthing is this fantastic building that's known as the Palace of Westminster. This bit Westminster Hall, a black built over 900 years ago. It's actually virtually the same age as
Just tell us what you do.
Sure. So how does an MP spend his or her time at Westminster? Well, we're either in the chamber, asking questions, raising concerns of local and national. Britain is heading to the ballot box. Christopher?
Yeah.
Actually,
Represent them and their interests.
they represent us in their
That was God, though.
There you go.
We have a new government. That's bad.
Okay.
We don't know who they are. It's kind of
It could be good. Well, last time when Labour come in, we have a very, very good economic growth.
well,
But this time I don't know.
maybe not maybe yet. I just hope we have the same people as last.
Well, they're managed.
No, so I think kind of in stark contrast to that, the NHS is actually chronically undermanaged. The NHS is obviously an incredibly large, complex organisation, but it actually, lots of the evidence indicates that you employ relatively few managers in the NHS. And one study suggested that managers make up around 2% of the NHS workforce, compared to 9.5% of managers, directors and senior officials in the UK workforce as a whole. A lot of the ways in which we talk about managers is really seeing it as a kind of a waste of money that could be spent on the front line. But how do you know how to deploy that frontline staff properly? How do you make sure that their rotas are all sorted and that they know which operating theatre they're going to be in? All those kind of different like process things and making sure that those processes are streamlined so that you get the most out of those staff. You need to have managers to have an efficient, productive health service.
Do we have any more direct evidence that having managers influences the productivity of the NHS?
Yeah, so actually the Institute for Fiscal Studies looked at how productivity was going in the NHS in a report in 2022, and they suggested that a shortage of managers could be contributing to weak NHS performance that we've seen.
Do we learn anything by comparing the NHS to health systems in other countries and how they use managers?
Yeah, so we can compare it to other countries and we find that the UK spends below the average on administration compared to other healthcare systems. Sometimes there are reasons why other healthcare systems may spend more on administration. So if we think about how a healthcare system is financed, if we've got a social insurance model, that could be a real driver in driving up administration costs. But definitely we spend less on that than other countries do. And I think, again, if we also just think about the comparison with the wider UK workforce, the NHS, despite it being a very complicated, large organisation, it still
has less managers than the wider UK workforce, and I think it's one of the things that really surprises people when they come into the NHS, for example, from other parts of the economy, and come in sometimes non-executive directors or that kind of role, and they really think, how is such a large organisation operating with the level of management that it does?
Our thanks to Charlotte Wickens from the King's Fund. Just because we're in election season doesn't mean we can leave politics. There is still time for a little light relief. With that in mind, I'm joined by Tom Coles. What have you got for us, Tom? Well, loyal listener Jonathan Carter emailed in to ask us about a number he'd seen in the Eye on a newspaper. The headline read, 20,000 dogs were destroyed a year. Why is no one really talking about this? Good grief. Light relief, Tom. You're supposed to be offering light relief. You might say that. But we need to serve our listeners, and Jonathan's email was short and to the point. He just said, please tell me this isn't true. Well, Jonathan, that is not how we roll. We can't just say a number isn't true because people don't want it to be true. But we'll take a look. On which point, Tom, your BBC name badge identifies you as the more or less cat correspondent. So conflict of interest here, no? Not at all, no. We are strictly impartial and the only election podcast that is prepared to take on the subject of dead dogs. Okay, I'll believe you. Others might not. Tell me about this 20,000 dogs number. Where does it come from? Well, it turns out to be one of those strange zombie statistics we come across every now and then that just lurks around without anyone questioning the source. So let's follow it back through time. So that comments article in the Eye says that the number comes from PETA, the animal rights group. They put the number in a press release earlier this year saying that
an estimated 20,000 dogs are euthanised in UK shelters every year because there aren't enough good homes for them.
But when I asked them where this came from, they just sent me a link to an article in the Metro from 2016. Right, so no actual research so far? No. We tracked down the writer of that article, who said at the time their job was to churn out 7 articles a day based on stories that were kicking around at the time. So that article was itself basically a knockoff of an article in The Sun from the same day. Right. Which cites an organisation called the Dog Rescue Federation as saying that 20,000 mutts are destroyed each year. Right. So you have now reached the source, Tom. What do the Dog Rescue Federation say about how they came up with the number? Well, that organisation no longer exists. No one seems to have heard of it, and I haven't been able to find anyone who was involved in that research. But apart from that, the number's perfectly solid. Rock solid. I do have a better estimate for you, Tom. Well, better in both senses, Tom. Lower and also more credible, because otherwise our loyal listener Jonathan is going to be very sad. You be the judge of that. Okay, so the number comes from the Association of Dogs and Cats Homes, an umbrella organisation that represents most of the big home organisations. They run a survey to work out how many dogs are put to sleep each year in their local dog homes, and the most recent survey covers 2023. That year, 5,335 dogs were euthanised, which is already a lot fewer than 20,000. But also, there are many other reasons a dog would be destroyed beyond there being no home for them. More than half were put to sleep on medical grounds. Most of the rest were put down for behavioural problems, aggressive dogs that bite, for example. A small proportion were destroyed because it's illegal to own those breeds. Now, there might be some basis in there. I can imagine some borderline decisions about which dogs are too sick or too aggressive to be home, but we're already a long way off from 20,000. Okay, so maybe the right number is 5,000, or maybe it's none at all, depending on how you look at it. Yeah. Another survey from the Dogs Trust looks just at stray dogs, and their latest analysis for 2021, so a bit old, but it estimates that another 374 stray dogs were put down. This number has come down significantly over recent decades. Now, there's no official registry of dog deaths, so it's possible there are other data sets, but I haven't been able to find them. Great stuff. So the number isn't zero, but it's a long way away from 20,000. So I hope that our loyal listener Jonathan can rest a little easier. Tom, how do the cats feel about this? I've asked the cats for a statement, Tim, but at the moment they're all sleeping. All of them? All of them. Thank you, Tom Coles. If you're listening, more or less. Oh, Kate Lamble is back, fresh from the desk of election news and now brandishing a phone. Hello, Kate.
Hello. Now, I don't know if you spend a lot of time on TikTok, Tim, but if not, I'm afraid to let you know that you have missed the
the song of the summer. You see, user girl on campus was looking for a man, and she wrote a list of credentials.
I'm looking for a man in finance, trust fund. 6'5", blue eyes. Finance, trust fund. 6'5", blue eyes.
And it was soon adapted into an unbelievably catchy tune.
I'm looking for a man in finance, trust fund. 6'5", blue eyes. Finance, trust fund.
GSIP, a Far East movement, as we call it, Asian American hip hop.
I've been coming here. We've got to wonder how many men essentially is this man's
Which normal man?
What do you mean normal men?
Just innocent men.
I've got 20 quid from our editor there for filling that club in before the end of our run.
Okay, Kate, let us go through everything in the order of the shopping.
First thing we're looking for, and there are lots to choose from. 20.5 million men between the ages of 18 and 65.
Because she's not looking for a boy in finance, and neither is she looking for a man who used to work in finance and is now retired.
Yeah, and now here I am interpreting a bit, but I reckon she is talking about a city boy. So I'm leaving out accountants, and controversially, I've left out insurance as a non-sexy profession.
I cannot endorse this, Kate. Accounting and insurance are definitely financial, and they're also sizzling hot.
Look, I'm not looking for an accountant. I'm sticking to the classic finance job, banking, fund management, and other financial services. There are 753,000 people in those jobs, and roughly 60% of full-time employees are men. And that gets us down to 451,800 men already.
Well, still a lot for a speed dating event, which is why we're looking for a man in finance with a trust fund.
Here, we're going to presume that we're not talking about child trust funds, which are a type of savings account most children born between 2002 and 2011 were given. Instead, we're going to look at the UK's Trust Registration Service, which in 2023 has 633,000 trusts registered. Now, we spoke to the tax expert, Dan Newman.
Never accuse us of not doing our research.
No, and he told us that a very, very small portion is the kind of trust fund that she's talking about. Some would be created for commercial transactions or to look after disabled family members. In fact, he said today the very wealthy don't tend to use trust funds because they have adverse consequences, and instead they'll likely use family investment companies, but they're not rich enough to understand.
Okay, let's be generous though and count every registered trust as having one beneficiary.
That is 0.9% of the population. 4,247 of the people working in finance if they were represented.
Don't forget, we're looking for a man in finance with a trust fund. 6'5".
6'5" is very, very, very tall. It's the 99th percentile of the men. So 0.4% of men are that or taller, meaning they're down to 70 men in the whole room.
And there's still one step to go. We're looking for a man in finance with a trust fund. 6'5", blue eyes.
Yeah, there was a 2019 literature review from researchers at the University College, which averaged together the results of a number of studies. And that suggests 42.8% of the British population have blue eyes. So that is 7 men.
So in the whole of the UK, only 7 men get built, and some of them could well be married.
Married to the moment.
Kate, you're married too.
They're a very nice girl.
So if you know one of these men, please get in touch. We're looking for them. Although the song doesn't specify what we should do once we find them. However, that's certainly not all men. This week has seen the start of the Wimbledon Tennis Championships. Legendary player Roger Federer retired from the sport. But he's still making headlines. Recently, in a speech that has since gone viral, he addressed a group of graduates from Dartmouth College in the US. One of the particularly striking things that caught the attention of us number lovers here more or less was
In tennis, perfection is impossible. In the 1,526 singles matches I played in my career, I won almost 80% of those matches. Now, I have a question for you. What percentage of points do you think I won in those matches? Only 54%. In other words, even top-ranked tennis players win barely more than half of the points they play.
We needed a slightly obsessive tennis fan with a penchant for statistics to help us with this one. Luckily, we found just the person.
My name is Jeff Sack. I've been running the website tennisabstract.com since 2010 or so, where I post basically all the tennis statistics I can find, as well as any analytics that I work up to go on.
So clearly the ideal person to examine Roger Federer's quite eye-catching play. So first of all, is it true?
Yes, 54%. That's correct. He actually understated one loss record a little bit. The official record has him at 82%. Matches won.
Okay, so being rather modest there. But people will find that surprising. Basically only won half the points, just over half the points, and yet completely dominated the matches he's won. So how does that work?
Well, commentators love to say that the margins in tennis are small, and 54% sounds close to 50% overall, but in tennis it's a pretty wide margin. And one way to think about it is imagine flipping a slightly unfair coin over and over again. And really tennis is just doing the same thing over and over and over again. A typical tennis match has over 100 points in it. So imagine you've got a slightly unfair coin where there's a 54% chance of it coming up heads. If you flip that coin 100 times, you might not get 54 heads, you might get 52 or 56 or even 49. But it's almost always going to come out above 50%. So that's not exactly how tennis works, but that's a good way, I think, of understanding why if you repeat that 54% proposition over and over and over and over and over again, then you're probably going to win more points than your opponent. You're probably going to win the match.
So, I mean, do we know if you're winning 54% of points, do you know what the chances of winning a particular game are those on?
Yeah, if you win 54% of your points, then you have a 60% chance of winning the game, almost exactly 60%.
And then, similarly, if you've got a 60% chance of winning the game, you're highly likely to win any particular set. It requires you to win 6 games and to be 2 games ahead. And then if you're, I don't know, 75% chance of winning the set, then you're over 80% chance of winning the match. That's the kind of the way that the probabilities stack up.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, one of the features of tennis, of course, is that you take turns to have games where you're serving and where you're receiving serve, and it's usually an advantage to be serving. How do the points win the percentages change between your service games and your receiving games?
That's something that differs a little bit between the men's game and the women's game. So let's start with Federer as an example. Over his career, he's won just short of 70% of his points on serve and just short of 40% of points on return. So that works out, if you average it out, that works out to about 51% total.
Now, I'm curious as to whether there's something unusual about Federer or whether you see the same basic pattern with other top players. For example, Serena Williams. Does she have similar numbers or is it quite different?
Yeah, the way the numbers break down is a little different because women's tennis is structured quite the same way as men's tennis. But since 2010 or so, we don't have good women's tennis data going back before that. But since 2010, so the second half of Serena's career, she won 55.5% of her points. So a little more dominant than Roger, but not overwhelmingly so, because she's in the same range.
And if you're wondering about some other notable players, Andy Murray has won 28% of his points, and Novak Djokovic and Rafael Nadal tied, winning 4.5%. Our thanks to Jeff Sack. Finally, an important update from Matt, YouTuber and friend of the program, Matt Parker, whose new book, Love Triangle, is out now. Anyone who's been listening to more or less for a long time or following my work knows of my campaign to fix the geometrically impossible street signs in the UK. So where there's a stadium, the kind of symbol on a street sign to indicate there's a football stadium over here is a picture of a football, but the classic football has pentagons and hexagons. It's got 12 pentagons, 20 hexagons. However, for some reason, and I've never found out why, when they designed the sign, instead of having 5-sided pentagon panels in the picture, they swapped them out for 6-sided hexagons. I have gone to great lengths to
to explain to the UK government and the UK populace at large why this is absolutely impossible. And we previously had a parliamentary petition to get it changed, and we got enough signatures that the government had to write to me and explain, well, they said no, and then they had to explain that they didn't care if their street signs are geometrically plausible or not. So I've now regrouped with a new strategy because, well, technically, you cannot have a ball, or indeed any kind of closed ball-like shape, made entirely from hexagons. You just can't get the curvature. Mathematically, it's impossible. I realized you could probably get a ball where it looks like it's made from all hexagons from one specific angle, and we hide all the other shapes around the other side. I have seen this ball. Yes, tell me. It's terrifying. So I found a custom football maker, and they actually reached out and said, hey, would you like to collaborate on something? And I'm like, yes, I need a ball which from one specific angle looks exactly like the street sign. And not only did he achieve that, but from two angles, the front and the back, the ball looks like the street sign, which is disconcerting. But around, like, I guess the equator, you can't see, there's a whole bunch of pentagons, there's some octagons in there, it's a mess of other shapes to make the curvature work. So I took it up to the Liverpool Football Club to get their sports analytics team to give it a kick around on their practice pitch, and they said that the players would hate it because as it moves, it changes how it looks. So I've still started a petition to get the Premier League changed to this new Impossible, but I suspect the players will be pretty up in arms. What I'm actually hoping will happen is that the Premier League will join me on my campaign to get the street signs fixed, and we can just use a normal football and the street signs can be accurate. Until that happens, I'm campaigning to change the football to match the street sign. You can hear more from Matt Parker on the mighty power of trigonometry on our podcast feed. You can just sign up for more or less behind the stats on BBC Sounds to make sure you don't miss it. If you want to try some puzzling probability problems, head to bbc.co.uk, search for more or less, and follow the links to the Open University. That is all we have time for this week, and indeed this series. But our podcast continues every week, all year round, so keep your questions and your comments coming in. You can also find me presenting Cautionary Tales with Tim Harford on BBC Sounds. As for the Radio 4 show, you know and love, we and it will be back in September. Until then, goodbye.
This was presented by Tim Harford, the producer, with Tom Collins. PM continues our post-general election coverage in just a moment, and then later there's a chance to hear what a live audience wants from the new government. Any questions from the Stevenage Arts and Leisure Centre is at 8 o'clock.
What does your song sound like?
You can hear the picture. It's like a beautiful story. Just listen to their fans sing. Glorious. The sound of that ace that came off the back end.
With the BBC Sounds app, you can take all of this with you wherever you go. Pause and rewind live radio and listen to your favourite music hits and podcasts all in one place. Don't miss a thing this summer. Download the BBC Sounds app.
This is BBC Radio 4. It's 5 o'clock. Time for PM with Evan Davis.
Hello. Well, a lot has changed since this time yesterday. I have just returned from Buckingham Palace, where I accepted an invitation from His Majesty the King to form the next government of this great nation. I want to thank the outgoing Prime Minister, Richard Sunak, who actually have to go private because there is even people on very limited finances, such as in my own constituency, because the waiting list means that they can't even get back to work. I'm really interested in this idea, though, of the tone of politics changing. We talked about integrity and taking a tougher stance on misdemeanors there. What do we mean by a change in tone? And
do we mean, because there was an interesting, intriguing reference in Keir Starmer's, I think it was his conference speech, about politics playing a less intrusive part in our lives, is that we just want to lower the volume
gently on our lives.
Yeah.
And you use this again today. No, I like that because I think, on the whole, most voters aren't interested in the ins and outs, the shenanigans that go on in parliamentary politics. They are interested, however, in whether their kids can get to the right kind of school, whether the school is any good and they're going to get decent GCSEs and go on to have a career in something that they really value. And whether, frankly, if they work all the hours God sends, whether they're still going to be relying on a food bank. So I think what Keir is very focused on is a mission-driven government that has a clear set of objectives and targets. I would guess that most ministers will therefore having a clear set of things that they have to achieve every year. And I think that will end up delivering significant change in the country. One very specific question, one issue that emerged last night was many Muslim voters deserting natural Labour voters, deserting Labour and causing some pain in some seats for the Labour Party. Interesting, new Foreign Secretary David Lammy, his first announcement as far as I can tell, he was setting back an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. That was listening in the last few minutes. I wonder whether that is a change in policy or maybe a response to what happened last night, or whether that is, if you like, just him reiterating what he's always been saying. So I think that is reiterating what we were saying before the general election. But of course now he's Foreign Secretary, so it's not just about words, it's about actions. And that's the significant difference to going into government. And Keir himself made this point, which is it's not words that are saying people's life opportunities in this country, it's the actions that we take as a government. And that's exactly the same in the Middle East. Of course, we've been calling for a ceasefire for a long time, but we need to, not just we in the UK, but we with all our allies, really need to devote a considerable amount of intellectual and emotional energy to bringing everybody around the table so that all the hostages are released, there's a proper ceasefire, and medical and humanitarian relief can be brought to those who need it in Gaza, and you get to a point where we can talk about a two-state solution again. Chris Bryant, good to talk to you. Thank you very much. It's 20 past 5. Let us look at some headlines. The way election here is Lucy Letwin has been handed another whole life prison sentence, being convicted of attempting to murder a baby girl in February 2016. Serial child killer has already served 14 months. The Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has met Vladimir Putin in Moscow on a visit that's been criticised by all European leaders. No mandate to represent warned against his A leading Russian dissident who was jailed for repeatedly criticising the war in Ukraine has been taken as Kara-Murza has suffered from a neurological condition since being poisoned. Thank you, Jim. Now, where are we? I was going to say still to declare in this competition, but in fact we only have one because all the UK have won one of those two, a fifth seat in the UK after a recount in 2007 and Surrey reform finally taken to 4.5, which does put the debate ahead of degree. There is another all the way through into polling day. Some people make their minds up really late. The pollsters can't do anything about that. So it could well be that the pollsters were more or less on money. But my feeling always is, and I said this before the election, the polls always seem to undercount the Tory votes. I mean, this just seems to be a rule of polls. I know there have been occasions where they haven't, but there must be something funny about them. There always seems to be undercounting Tories.
Well, it is a regular pattern. Yes, for as long as we've had a polling industry in this country, more often than not, your wise advice in the final week of the campaign would be add a couple to the Conservative share, drop a couple from the Labour share. But this time, adding a couple to the Conservative share meant they were still on their worst share level. And dropping a couple from the Labour share did mean that we got into this remarkable zone with the election system.
Now, here is my final question. I want to know where the public are, big picture. And we know that the Lib Dems and Labour are closer to each other than Lib Dems and Tories. Can you do the following? Add up Conservative and Reform votes
Conservative and Reform, they together got 38% of the total vote. And say that is the right-wing vote in this country, and then add up Green, Lib Dem, Labour, and say the left-wing or the progressive or the non-right-wing vote added up to 53% of the electorate. Does it make sense to say that's a way of looking at the schism in politics?
In a word, no, I don't think so. And in a longer sentence, to paraphrase our recently departed Foreign Secretary, if my mother had wheels, she'd be a bicycle. You can't just take parties that are very different to each other and lump them together just because in some abstract sense they're similar. And I'll tell you why. Reform voters were told all the way through this campaign, if you vote for Reform, you will hurt the cause of the Conservative Party. And they said, fine. Green voters were told all the way through this campaign, if you vote for the Green Party, you are damaging the prospects of getting the Labour.
It's the right party and voting to the right. First of all on the EU, then on net zero, and now increasingly on immigration.
How do you think then we will see a bigger role of this brand of right-wing populism in the UK? Have they been successful in what occurs right now?
I think so, not least because they have Nigel Farage back. You know, what many people, the problem that many people have with the two mainstream parties is that they haven't got any personnel really at the top with any form of, you know, what you might describe as charisma, and Nigel Farage does have that. And so I think, you know, because they've managed to sort of drag him out of retirement or whatever it is that he was doing, they have now got somebody who's basically able to galvanize a section of the population behind him, and that will play a role.
A lot of this is true not just in the UK, but in a lot of right-wing movements within Europe. One thing that came up again and again is immigration in the UK, reducing it, tightening borders. In fact, one of the biggest promises of Brexit, right, was that if the UK left the EU, it would be able to tighten borders. Nikolai, do you think that that promise after Brexit has been fulfilled?
Yes and no. I mean, the ironic thing is that the Brexit referendum was about migration from the EU. And that actually went down. A lot of less people from the EU come to the UK, and many people from the EU have left. But what has risen is illegal migration into the UK to a very, very strong extent, but also migration from other parts of the world, like Hong Kong, Pakistan, India, that has also risen. And so right now, the net migration of the UK has reached figures that were never reached before the Brexit referendum, over 600,000 people per year. And that means for many Brexiteers who want to vote for Brexit to really control the borders, the exact opposite has happened. We have the small vote crisis, and even the Conservative Party, with all the policy that Rishi Sunak tried to implement, has not managed to really control the border. And this is one of the core reasons why the attack of the far right is so open. Nigel Farage, but also people within the Conservative Party attacking Rishi Sunak and saying we have not really fulfilled our core problem of controlling migration, controlling our own borders.
And Oliver, what is Labour promising here regarding migration?
First of all, I hate to contradict Nikolai with his considerable expertise, but while the political focus is very much on irregular immigration, the increase that we've seen in immigration from outside the EU has overwhelmingly been regular labour migration to fill unfilled jobs, above all in the care sector and in the health sector. And
areas that are really lacking.
Even the Reform Party, in its manifesto, that is the right-wing populist party, admits that it would only try and curb non-necessary immigration, right? Because there is actually a kind of silent political consensus that our economy can only be sustained, we can only pay for people to look after our elderly mothers or to sustain the NHS with a certain level of immigration. Not even skilled labor, but also that's
Labour's platform this time around?
I don't think Labour has taken any kind of very particularly strong position on the subject.
They've said that they want to shelve the Rwanda policy, and that their aim is to get illegal migration under control by sort of tackling the criminal gangs rather than trying to establish the deterrent of the Rwanda policy. But they're also, I think, back again to this new vast, to be very, very careful not to talk about immigration, because that is one of the tech lines of the Conservatives, saying if you get Labour, you will get much more people to the UK. There was a very nasty effort by the Conservative Party where they showed somebody from Labour rolling out a red carpet
at the British coast and saying, if you vote Labour, you will get lots of more illegal immigration. So they're very careful not to talk about that, even if, as you said, legal migration is actually increasing and helpful for the UK.
Because the numbers here are tiny, right? The Rwanda scheme, we're talking about maybe a few hundred people at most being deported each year. The obsession with the so-called small boats.
And to really turn the country around. I think the best line I would describe Labour's current policy was we want to do a lot of things like the Tories, but we want to do them more competently. And then Keir Starmer will try to very carefully readjust some of the levers of the UK public policy to address these fiscal circumstances. I don't think foreign policy will be a big issue, so even the UK-EU relationship, which we talked about in the beginning, Labour will only very carefully address that, and really the focus will be on tackling NHS, the cost of living crisis, with a sort of small levers, and Labour trying to convince the economy to invest more in the country. And this is what I think Starmer will say on day one after the elections.
Oliver, where does this leave the Conservatives then, assuming Labour does roll to victory as the polls are showing? What do you expect to come next in the reckoning?
This is actually a super interesting and unpredictable question, I think, because the general default assumption is that they will draw the lesson from their defeat, that they weren't far enough to the right, and that's why they hemorrhaged so many votes to the right from the populists, rather than concluding that they lost it in the middle and we should have tried to fight Labour for the centre ground, and that therefore it would get increasingly radical. You would have a right-wing leader, somebody like Suella Braverman or Priti Patel, who are the former Home Secretaries. But there are also analyses that suggest the complexion of the parliamentary party could actually be pretty centrist after the election. It could be like radically different to what we've been used to for the past 5 years. In which case, it is very possible that they could recognise quite quickly that the only plausible route they've got back to power is to appoint somebody who can try and bring them back into the centre ground.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Katja, let's come to you. Is the UK, do you think, if you had to look to your crystal ball and make a prediction, what's happening next year in the UK? Will it see change, as Keir Starmer is promising? Or does Brexit have a role in fundamentally crippling it in what it sees in the years ahead in terms of its economy and its standing on the world stage?
I don't think Brexit will necessarily play a huge role. I think Keir Starmer has already said, that obviously he doesn't want to take the UK back in. He will try and tweak basically the existing agreements, be that on security or on imports, exports, and so on. But it will be incremental change. I don't think that the big thing that will dominate the headlines. I think for me an interesting question is what's happening internally with the Labour Party. I mean, this kind of Mingars approach that we've been talking about has also worked, towards the inside really of the Labour Party, because that's very divided, and whether Keir Starmer can bring that together, the left and the right wing kind of wings of it, and then run the country with them, remains to be seen.
我哋有呢個飛機話有呢一樣，但係喺實際操作上就大家即係心裏有數嘅，呢啲人都講有啊，但係冚唔到個波蓋，同埋係一些小朋友嘅家長咧係有啲，我哋明白即係當中嗰個環境做唔做咯，即係如果唔出聲就做唔到㗎，直情係匿埋下當睇唔到，因為真係睇唔到學校。
時候咧，頭先 Miss 都講到，即係學校雖然做唔切，但係佢明咧，嘗試理解下家長，咁家長咧都會完全接受啦，都嘗試體諒啦。但係我見嗰啲 case 咧就真係唔係學校唔理解，唔係家長唔理解，而係大家咧係唔應該喺埋一齊嘅。就係一個即係我而家一個學生係喺以前咧，就曾經咧係獲派咧去一間主流學校喎，而一個中度視障有自閉症嘅妹，當然有一定嘅溝通障礙啦。咁佢媽咪講翻咧就係話，當時候佢嗰度嘅 council 就派咗間主流學校俾佢，升中啊嘛呢一聲。咁但係明小學都係讀特殊學校，點解中學會去咗主流嘅咧？莫非佢突然間啲智能好咗？咁梗係唔係啦，就話冇位嘅，就話當時候佢嗰個鎮嘅一啲嘅特殊教學位，即係中學級嘅，總之就話冇位俾佢啦。咁但係咧，阿妹咧就喺主流度讀咗9個月，咁但係媽話當時即係佢都明白聽好咗，但係我間係主流學校嚟㗎嘛，裏邊當然有即係 SEN 嘅同學仔嘅，即係好似阿 Slow 唔到嘅同學仔都係即係唔同類型㗎啦，即係SEN 都會有啦。不過佢哋相對上咧，即係可能讀同寫都會做得到，只不過可能會論盡一啲。咁但係我講緊個學生咧，直情係冇乜即係所謂文嗰個。咁如果報成績，咁學校雖然有溫和音樂形式嘅中間，即係唔再係天使嘅中即係我哋係啲一次就好，或者下班都好，佢就已經暫時係基本上佢即係佢離開班講要考啦，成績咁樣啦，佢已經喐咗啦，出過唔少，一聽就係嗰種。即係諗下，每次一次，跟住又變成大，跟住依含大家又搞到上嚟。其實成日嚟講咧，佢簡直係 overwhelm 晒。咁所以後尾媽咪就決定做一次council都係話未俾到你，即係幫緊你。咁佢話你點樣唔好咯？喺後尾咧，佢就終於咧就council就派咗佢我個學校啦。咁我做緊嘅嗰間學校咧係特殊寄宿學校，其實係私立嘅，但係裏邊90%學生都有 HCD， 咁亦都係有即係政府俾佢嘅即係有相應嘅 funding 咧喺我哋嗰度讀書啊，係即係攞資源嘅。咁佢嚟到我哋學校，慢慢當然要適應啦，因為由跟住佢9個月喺主流學校。有幾個月喺屋企啦，即係由一個話充滿人聲、嚇到佢震嘅地方，去到擔心佢同學生上一堂課有啲嘅一啲嘅內容，係按照佢嘅需要開始講嘅。英國咧其實喺大概6年咗㗎啦，就佢因為世界嘅少數國家咧就係推廣呢個 adaptive teaching。咩意思咧？即係話佢覺得其實所有學生咧應該要有唔同一個學習環境，因為佢會覺得我哋唔應該好似我哋學生聽咗佢嘅嗰個想唔到佢哋應有嘅嗰個潛能，咁所以咧應該係我哋作為老師喺班房裏面咧用嘅方法嚟調做學校嘅就係成個嘅班級嘅嘅通過唔同型號嘅法律幫到有班有錢有幫所有學生不同嘅學習品質，總之要幫佢達到同一個
雙方都要知道係想要嘅嘢。咁你係冇一個機會俾我雙方有個好嘅模式去幫去達到嗰個即係所有人嘅話嘅目的。更甚嘅就係咧，喺呢一度嗰個教學地方咧，由於如果講係一個即係咁呢一度嘅上堂咧，我諗到好多家長都係學生係學書亦都就參考翻一個本地我哋喺小學生好有可能或者係佢可能會抄呢啲嘅話，其實咁而係令到佢如果有效咁做，跟住又攞啲小朋友查出我按照佢嘅能力有咁嘅程序，俾到佢同其他同學一齊學習嘅都成咁變相咧，其實反而當我哋諗翻，其實好似有個機去一咁樣去幫我小朋友調翻轉行出嚟嘅時候咧，都會難啲事。其實個 TA 喺唔知個課堂點樣有效幫助情況之下咧，其實係監管住佢哋嘅好嘅情況。呢個前排學校嚟講係有時 TA 喺課堂裏面出嚟嘅時候係咁樣嘅政策之下咧，幅度大真係幫到一齊。我做過 TA 我知好型嘅呢個係。咁所以我哋去做乜嘢咧？就係我所講嘅其實只係希望個小朋友即係咁簡單唔係咁但係我哋再我嘅成績只係基礎啫，但係一路做呢個工作就會發現其實嗰個 TA 嗰個運作係好重要嘅，即係 SEN 嘅資源係資源嘅話咧，咁你就會發現喺具體運作上可以係傷害到細路。我講呢個即係我高呢個實際嘅運作。咁當然啦，我嗰時先學即係我嗰時因為學校個 SEN 人數係少啊，咁所以變咗嗰條 team 咧係有一個比較新有力嘅即係 sample 啦，咁就但係有一堆係佢係即係高級嘅 senior 嘅 TA，而啲 senior 嘅 TA 其實係 well trained 嘅，即係佢哋係有能力去做好啦，佢有能力開始做啦，佢係需即係喺學校上面可以溝通安排啦。咁但係我哋咁前嗰啲 TA 咧，就同我另外一啲即係其實係嚟自咩地方㗎？家長啦，或者都係 agent 派入嚟㗎啦。咁所以我哋可以做嘅嘢咧，就係希望個同學上堂嘅時候專心。但係咧，如果係嗰個即係
就做一個叫做咧 attitude report 態度報告啦。咁個學生咧就要喺嗰個學期咧就拎住嗰個每一堂咧上堂之前咧，佢就交俾嗰個老師，咁咧就嗰個老師咧就要適時咧就係按照佢嗰一堂喺課上嘅表現咧係俾分嘅喎，即係有唔同嘅選項啦，有唔同嘅標準。咁啊呢個做一兩個學期咧，全部達到咧 outstanding 或者係 good 嗰個水平咧，先至使個用開。咁啊，想問下 Sandra 啦，其實咧，如果你聽呢一樣嘢啊，對於真係嗰個嘅 SEN 學生係對佢有冇一個實際嘅幫助，或者你覺得個效用幾大？
我梗係覺得冇幫助啦，不過就聽落去就好似即係個學生咧都有 KPI 要符合喎，即係要交數喎咁樣。咁嗱，其實兩個結果嘅啫，即係可能阿仔咧就真係即係跟住呢個遊戲玩，即係佢真係當一個遊戲去玩啦。即係我咪即係演一陣，我做俾你睇，咁但係其實遊魂嘅嘢，你可以遊魂到一個位你睇到，你又可以遊魂到人睇唔到，但係你繼續遊魂啊嘛。即係遊魂可以即係有好多其實方法。咁所以其實根本就係生活嘅。咁我諗，如果呢個佢係
多數聽到呢個即係好有興趣嘅時候，其實佢會好投入嘅。咁但係咧，當仲有興趣或者可能會想某一場喺嗰個環境裏面係我哋話佢一啲嘅特殊需要嘅細路，特別即係幼稚園嘅啦，可能會講即係講幾多書之前咧，就留意下佢會有啲即係特殊嘅需要啊，即係可能例如咧，佢反而壓力會專科咁樣咧，佢上堂咧，佢又會專心聽到你講。但係當我哋咧仲係用嗰套好即係好古老石山，即係所謂專注係坐定手擺喺膝頭喐咁樣嘅時候咧，咁佢就一定有問題。即係由道上太空咧，你都拉翻去翻嚟。咁我諗係即係如果係好啊，好溝通下，即係溝通嘅策略。咁有 TA 㗎嘛，咁可以即係 TA 講有啲乜嘢可以幫到啊仔，等佢咧嗰個遊嘅情況一啲例如佢係即係一定攞去知點做，其實少咧就咁一定有啲嘢可以係即係幫到佢。咁既然咧小朋友咧佢係識聽識講，都係可以同佢即係可以同佢討論究竟咩嘢情況之下做啲乜嘢嘢，可能老師會有啲乜嘢講咗，都會某一個情況某一個動作係咁樣攤喺度。咁其實人哋即係講緊書嗰個係會覺得好沮喪㗎，即係好失望。有啲嘢你可以同佢抽時間出嚟同佢去傾，即係用社交故事又好，或者其他嘅方式都好，其實可以傾咯。因為我覺得佢有足夠嘅能力去理解到點解你想去學得到，或者你點解想去堅持到呢堂，因為跟住你有多人要做嘅嘢咧，你根本你就唔知我做乜，就由嗰度開始針對嘅問題，所以亦都要聽下呢個學生嘅聲音先咯，即係先知道佢有乜嘢需要咯。我哋成日講啦，即係就算係 TA 又好，老師又好，家長都好啦，叫 R 呢個 OWL 嘅貓頭又係用呢啲簡單嘅方式記得，你觀察佢先啦，學上你喂你咁快叫佢做啲咩態度個做寫 KPI 你哋，你估下其實有冇啲人可能你做咗或者俾咗你老師嘅咧？即係我諗佢小朋友又好，之後學校又好，中學之後都好，我哋少用嘅學生角度，或者係教嗰個角度，可能係少得咯。同埋咧，其實喺呢個本身
咁所以即係呢個我只能夠話呢個 calling out
衞隊佢哋老師去溝通表達。我又睇到有啲學校咧，其實即係當然啦，好似頭先 Natalie 咁講咧，好睇個高層啊，即係嗰個就係 senior leadership team 啦，係點樣融合呢啲 SEN 嘅小朋友呢件事啦。咁我睇到一啲學校咧個做法都有幾得意嘅。咁佢咧就係即係對住班中學生咧，其實佢哋就當然啦，好似頭先話一啲咩anti-bullying 嘅 ambassador 啊等等唔同嘅 program 啊等等啦。咁咧佢咧就即係話我嚟呢一間學校嘅，佢哋有一啲嘅課堂啦，我唔知係大班嘅 ambassador 定係點定係一啲活動，就係介紹唔同嘅 SEN， 即係唔係介紹個同學啊，係介紹嗰個嘅情況啊，即係如果咧自閉症咧，可能佢哋係會點樣㗎？或者如果有 ADHD 咧，點解咁偏頭痛嘅咧？咁佢哋個腦仔裏邊其實可能有啲乜嘢同其他人唔一樣嘅咧？咁亦都咧有一啲教師、有啲老師咧，即係見咗佢哋係會主動一啲嘅 SEN 學生嘅家長咧，就會有啲乜嘢通常見到佢出單啊，或者係直接做 mail 單嘅時候，佢會用得到嘅地方，或者啊原來佢只係要俾佢入啲果汁就好啲嘅，就佢哋講出聲，咁我哋就唔使即係多條嘅喺度拉鋸啦。咁呢啲其實都係比較咁我覺得係包括其他同學嘅理解咧，雖然其他嘅小朋友佢哋需要有啲咩最好就係做嘅，但係如果佢明白多少少咧，其實咧嗰個嘅同學仔喺個班裏邊，佢亦都被人多啲嘅接納，因為知道咧佢有時候出口唔出嚟答，係因為佢哋可能其實係啦，嗰度咧就，但係更加多係因為佢真係比較聰明，佢對抗唔到佢自己所講嘅，或者佢對重複嚟嘅喺把口度咯，佢要不斷重複講個人先至可以覺得我可以繼續標準佢嘅思維，咁又有啲咁嘅情況，咁所以理想同現實咧真係差啲嘅，咁但係中間咧又有
也不會咁掉晒落垃圾桶，所以其實我今集會同大家講嘅嗰樣可以食嘅嘢係咩，都非常之明顯㗎啦。冇錯，就係肉類。用肉類去取代人工糖同埋精製碳水化合物，對我哋有咩好處呢？純肉飲食又有咩壞處？今條片小弟會引用《肉食密碼》呢一本書嚟同大家分享一下，同埋最後都會講埋點解呢本書嘅作者最後會放棄咗純肉飲食。首先講下大眾對紅肉嘅誤解係點嚟嘅先。咁好多關於紅肉嘅誤解，其實都係嚟自於世界衛生組織嘅國際癌症研究員IARC喺2015年公佈嘅一份報告。咁聽起嚟係咪好權威、好可靠、好高質素咧？其實係嘅。IARC 呢個組織入面有嚟自10個國家嘅22名科學家，然後佢哋仔細審視過800篇研究之後，得出咗呢個結論，就係話每日每食用100克紅肉就會增加17%嘅大腸癌風險。正如我哋食保健，每50克加工處理過嘅紅肉就會增加18%嘅風險。咁再跟住落嚟咧，佢哋就喺一篇毀滅性嘅報告入邊，將紅肉列為對人類可能致癌，聽起上嚟好似好大鑊咁啊嚇！咁但係究竟佢呢啲聲明係冇乜根據嘅咧？3年之後嘅2018年，關於呢一個研究，有一篇更加詳盡嘅報告披露咗，原來喺800篇嘅研究入邊，只係得14篇喺佢哋最終嘅結論入邊有受到考量。仲要當中嘅每一篇研究都只係觀察性嘅流行病學研究。咁至於點解另外嗰786篇嘅研究都相對排除咧？仲要最後納入 IARC 報告嗰14則流行病學研究入邊，有8個都係未呈現食用肉類及大腸癌嘅發展有冇錯，你冇眼花，亦都冇聽錯。喺呢份報告入邊，當中所考量嘅大部分研究都冇呈現出食用紅肉同大腸癌之間嘅關聯性，然後就喺剩低嗰6個研究入邊，都只係得1個就顯示出肉類同癌症之間喺統計學上顯示嘅關聯性。不過，其實喺流行病學嘅研究入邊，除咗檢驗兩項事物之間嘅關聯性之外，我哋咧仲可以探討呢一個關聯性嘅強度。咁當兩項事物具有關聯性，係
但係就未達到統計顯示性嘅時候，咁我哋咧係唔會好嚴肅咁看待㗎，因為我哋都知道我哋係需要更加多嘅研究去釐清呢一個關係。咁如果唔係好聽得明嘅話咧，我試下舉個好錯嘅例子咧，大家就會明㗎啦。就係所有嘅死者生前都有飲過水㗎，咁但係就唔代表飲水㗎嘛。咁另外咧，我或者試下舉個接近多啲嘅例子，就係食素嘅人通常咧都唔煙嘅，咁但係咧多食肉嘅人當中嘅煙民嘅比例咧就會比食素嘅高。咁最後如果食肉嘅人佢嘅平均致癌率係較高嘅話，咁究竟係因為食肉係因為食煙咧？所以我哋一日分開食肉同食煙嘅人，呢個就係結果係一個嘅參考價值啦。相反，有一個針對亞洲人嘅一份研究，當中包含咗超過20萬名嘅參與者，受到為期平均10年嘅觀察，並呈現咗喺食用最多肉類嘅男性同女性，佢哋嘅心血管死亡率同埋癌症死亡率都分別係喺下降嘅情形。另外喺一個研究入邊，喺大鼠身上注射咗一種會誘發大腸癌嘅劑，就喺注射100日入邊餵隻大鼠食豬肉、雞肉、牛肉或者佢哋日常嘅食物。咁研究人員都發現，同控制組相比起嚟，喺飲食入邊增加肉類並冇增加大腸癌發生嘅機率。又或者係我哋需要更加多嘅研究先可以證實肉類會間接帶嚟大腸癌風險增加嘅呢個假設。咁又或者咧用翻小弟早幾年嘅講法，就係人類出現咗25萬年，喺呢25萬年都只係食肉㗎啦。咁如果食用係咁大問題嘅話，人類就係唔好落去啦，乜都食晒啦。咁之後仲有一班咧質疑呢個 IARC 報告嘅研究人員，最近咧都出版咗研究，當中咧就提到，我哋對於12項獨特嘅試驗，經過咗54,000名參與者嘅行為入邊，發現咗確定性低至極低嘅證據，證明含有較低嘅微加工肉飲食喺主要心血管代謝後果同癌症死亡率同發生風險上面效應係少或者係零。另外喺呢個發展同埋長遠嘅效果上面，相較於素食主義飲食法，我哋亦都得到特食性飲食法係可能健康效益嘅證據。所以本小組咧係建議成人應該繼續攝取微加工嘅食物㗎。好，講完食肉其實有冇咩害處之後，我話講下優點。第一點，我覺得最後嘅優點就係飲食減肥啦。咁聽人指出講減肥咧係會幫到減肥嘅，可以幫到減肥亦都可以話係一個重點啦。食肉可以減肥，最標誌嘅講法係我哋個胃要用更加多嘅時間去消化肉類。首先雞肉大概需要2到4個鐘去消化，牛肉需要食2個鐘，豬肉需要食2個鐘，魚需要6至8個鐘，需要更加長嘅時間去消化。同時都代表住我哋咧更加飽肚。咁講緊嘅係充滿住我哋身體所需要嘅營養咁去飽喎。咁另外更加重要嘅係食肉加長咗我哋胃部嘅工作時間。咁誇張啲講句就係個胃消化得耐少少啊，隨時用嘅能量仲多過我哋去跑3公里㗎。咁又或者換一個科學啲嘅講法去講，就係肉類通常都含有比較高嘅優質蛋白，而蛋白質唔單止係需要較長嘅時間去消化，同時咧仲可以刺激飽腹激素嘅分泌，例如 PYY 同埋 GLP-1 嘅釋放。咁呢啲嘅分泌咧會較快令到我哋覺得飽，但係進食碳水化合物就係當我哋以為咧只係食到7-8成飽，然後隔一陣先至真係會覺得好飽啊，即係食得太多嘢，咁樣下下食得晒，嘢有鬼啦。另外佢多數化學係有助於肌肉生長同收穫，咁啊並會坊間討論嘅個價格越高係啦，係咁wow，咁嘅人佢有隻產品就係呢個高脂啦，好多啦，咁最起碼我哋做翻有湯啊、好臭啊同埋另一個重點咧就係肉類含有嘅脂肪，講緊咧係有隻脂肪，亦都可以提供比較長時間嘅飽腹感，因為我需要更加多嘅酵素、質同消化，個消化速度咧比較慢，咁樣咧亦都延遲咗我哋飽腹感，到我就變得長嘅。當然我就如果脂肪嘅卡路里咧就會好多嘅喎，所以用肉類去取代碳水化合物係可以穩定血糖水平同幫助我哋改善身體。肉類含有非常之少嘅碳水化合物，換句話講，肉類咧就唔令到我哋血糖水平吸入我哋嘅身體，亦都會降低咗我哋身體血糖素分泌需求。喺如果胰島素量方面咧都大大減低㗎，咁樣就有助於胰島素體嘅恢復，都可以好有效咁改善我哋身體對胰島素嘅控制。咁講到最後研究顯示，低碳水化合物嘅飲食係可以幫助到肺炎病患者去恢復胰島素嘅控制。另外，食少咗高糖、高加工嘅食物係可以有效咁減少身體嘅炎症同埋本人嘅炎症，改善心血管嘅健康。而且喺高脂肪、高蛋白嘅飲食入邊，如果真係天然非常有道嘅高脂肪，我當中嘅omega 3脂肪酸 酸同埋抗氧化劑，可以有效咁減少身體入面嘅炎症反應。咁呢一樣嘢咧都可以有效咁保護心血管嘅。第三點亦都係最重要嘅一點，就係可以減少身體嘅炎症反應啦。啱啱都講過，高脂肪、高蛋白、低碳水化合物飲食入邊嘅奧美加3脂肪酸同埋抗氧化劑，係可以減少身體入邊嘅炎症反應。原因就係因為呢一種飲食可以有效咁降低我哋身體入面嘅 CRP，亦即係脂反應蛋白水平。咁呢一種蛋白水平咧可以話係炎症嘅馬身嚟㗎。至於點解我會話減低身體入面嘅炎症會係最重要嘅一點咧？之前已經都有講過㗎啦，就係因為咧好多嘅疾病的確係同身體嘅馬身有關係。但係如果係一種持續嘅反應發生緊嘅時候咧，你唔一定可以觀察到。不過當你察覺到嘅時候，呢個時可能已經變咗做係身體嘅疾病，產生出現導致嘅有關啲形成，會話喺入邊咧變咗個非常之大嘅個密度嘅炎症會導致眼發、口乾，從而增加咗心臟病嘅風險。同埋呢個炎症對所有嘅仲同好多疾病嘅源頭，例如對風濕症、關節炎同埋可能心臟病嘅老人家高血壓同埋血脂嘅異常產生嘅代謝綜合類疾病，妊娠者癌症同呢個症都會係慢性病嘅關係。最終，如果我哋每日都發現，咁即係個免疫系統咧就從來都冇休息過，當時咧仲要仰賴口服類固醇添。咁呢啲藥物咧雖然壓制咗佢暴走嘅自體免疫系統，但係咧就帶嚟嚴重嘅失眠、情緒波動、身體健康健康狀況咧可以話係失晒衡㗎。純粹飲食就幫佢完全解決晒以上所有問題，但係喺佢執行上嘅方式上咧，就有佢嘅血糖指數下降到700，出現咗上來胃嘅問題。之後咧，佢哋再了解到原來胰島素信號喺腎臟層面嚟講係對於保留抗啦，係保留減抗嘅所以腎持續嘅食咧，只會令到佢得翻極少嘅胰島素分泌，咁咧就會造成身體保留唔到需要嘅礦物質，咁對佢嚟講係當然係一件好事啦。所以佢啲解釋有一方面加咗蜂蜜水果，不過咧就繼續小麥、大豆、種子、堅果同薯片。之所以點解佢會食水果咧，係因為佢知道水果成熟嘅時候，食物本身有嘅糖同埋質嘅含量咧，係實際上會係最低嘅。所以食水果同埋啲水果嘅。所以如果大家都想試下食啲靚嘅水果咧，可以試下我哋嘅水果系列，真係純天然喎，添加濃化劑嘅原油都冇落㗎，叫大家不妨試下，或者去提廣嘅金湖道都得。今集咧就講到嚟呢一度先，之後咧就會拍片詳細講下純素同埋純肉分別咧會出現啲咩健康嘅問題。今期呢個會我哋精華咧就會同大家講下純肉飲食點樣幫到糖尿病，同埋如果你真係要執行嘅話咧，有咩需要注意。咁另外入邊都會輕同大家講下食用高素質嘅呢件事嘅，今期都係寫嘅，冇回頭精華咧都會有人回應嘅，係咪冇廣告？如果想走完我同高人嘅，好易嘅，天生有文化有文化，打牌有打牌，熱氣球有熱氣球，熱情保西，好熱情收雞啊，頭三大嘅而家，咁嚟同我哋一齊食翻嚟睇咁樣啦。想講嘅話咧，快啲行嚟幫我哋啦。今日呢個嚟呢度，我哋見不妨咧，即係嚟翻嚟嘅成個咧，就4月17日，然後我哋4月2鐘5點情況啦。咁大家，我哋今次我哋非常歡迎，希望大家多多支持。虽然是 当然，南部咱们身在加拿大法语区的主边越南地区，通过受害人名字和地址进行搜索，一番顺藤摸瓜之下，我们就找到了最开始跟踪报道这起案件的法文媒体和巴黑西案。在充值了每周1欧的订阅之后呢，终于查到了包括去年5月的入室凶杀案、6月的爱马仕大劫案和2024年6月7日法庭判决在内的一共8篇专题报道，为的就是从源头上还原这起案件的真相。并且呢，我们还连线了几位曾经在法国、意大利、美国做过奢侈品代购以及零售的前从业者，请他们给我们分享了行业中的种种内幕和猫腻，搞明白为什么说这起代购杀人案的发生是意料之外，却又是情理之中。总之啊，大家想听就想看的，我们一定尽量安排到位。还请各位能够动动小手指，点赞订阅。下面就让我们来讲讲贵族最好爱的事。卡车刚刚离开消防局，好第一次突然前面杀了一辆火消防车，车顶上的闪光器突然装红灯，大一下，车子在电影警车，这辆车快速减速防止大车，到路边，车上跳下3个人，一边高喊警察、海关，一边走过来，其中一人身上还穿着很亮的防弹背心，手上挥着大手枪。看到这个架势，感觉有点高，直觉认为是海关为了进行走私案件的抽查，打开车门骗子。结果谁知啊，对方算是突然一拥而上，把自己脱下来之后蒙上头反套，飞出了那辆黑色3系车的后座，并且对着他啪一声就不许出声。随后啊，车子启动了，开了大约1个小时，最后啊，被巴士只是在一条内裤的坎上，被一脚给踢了下来。一看，这是一个空空荡荡的车塔，经过这个10多分钟，却决定向消防局打电话报警。其实啊，这起小事件法国有一个8级治安确实恶化，小偷小摸是家常便饭，难不成是死还乱？法国警察的处理方式与加拿大警察这边出车贼差不多，简单登记备案，然后走保险就没了。但即使是做了如此出车，因为这种货车吃土金，倒不是因为案子公司给出的这个损失金额高达150万欧元啊，而是因为里面装的货物故意有的。
报价是10%。林同学这样的2道贩子呢，通常只有拿到3%左右。不过，这卖价高，价格实在是高，所以呢赚大钱虽然说不上，但是让林同学宅在家里打游戏，叫几顿外卖还是够的。根据他遇害前在网上发出的帖子来看，他总是等到一个大的包包被抢回来，再准备别人给小吃了。甚至在网上跟林同学下单的那个大客户，也有可能就是2条死的小号，从一开始处也开而去，大喜是他的打手心态，那是很保送一条性格。而且呢，这么着也能够解释为什么老总会对林同学拳打脚踢，大概率就是在逼问这包包的下方。也许雇主在下单这个抢人的时候，说他背后要取得死包，这根本高姆结论，大部分毒案变成没杀人，没有背后还有就这些在网上只要让人们人都说了，老几那老几一张一张破成员半个人都没有实际的认识。不过自然论的讲法和法律赛局的讲法，同时根本的情况下，可能保有不完全这才中断。但是在法国法律最常用的这张小姐姐都是就连那次破车劫案，最后也是交警被判处而且李大小姐全身而退，毫发无伤。事实上呢，李大小姐在犯罪之前还在小区上卖鸡蛋糕，接下来上班非常小卖肉进行危险，人群张口中新好老公变成了在脱口而出，还强调说2人同意结婚，想要要钱的话最好是先他本人要。这种卖账不卖的不争气状态，实在是让正在被坑的人厌恶的那种恶心。于是，在小红书上、微博上还有知乎上，都出现了不少有关孔大小姐的爆料，甚至连带奢侈品代购这一行都被发了。都是在直播各地的大的小品代购生活的半壁江山。尤其是这行当，他还不需要任何的准备，无论是想干还是又要上学的学生，只需要花一点时间购物，在这江湖之间当搬运工，就能轻松赚到洗衣精，不用什么活本扫花钱。后来事情慢慢发展出一种职业，那些代购事业打面诈骗这种而且2道贩子，而且是专门学生代购的，就能赚4亿是还是高了。不过，这件事情他代购很多廉价的快递越来越大，家务全网支付，甚至还偷偷的降低高关税优惠，这样一来，这些干活的都是来走。再来，像是很多小姐姐高官大臣，收到了一个小消息，自然的是在包到3甲高，成为水涨船高。3年不开张，开张吃3年。2来，就是因为爱势力，没有代购还真不行。这个呀，就要提到他们在背后其他的背后制作。根据一对曾经在爱马仕店位哥贵个个衣着讲究太高，但实际上他们的基本工资并不比沃尔玛那种大卖场员工高的哪里。他们收入的大头呢，全部来自于销售的提成。根据对商品的喜欢程度可以对应提成的。他像 Guess、国际这样的品牌包包，因为是全手工制作，出来的小一点的美院呢，算2次才能分得到一支，不活多而包包少，根本不可能销量。销售量这样的包，提成是很低的，大约就是1%左右，甚至有的店根本不给提成。而那些不管是用途还是设计都很低的产品，提成则至少是50%以下。
伴手礼，说专属出售的电子全球的几百名等手，还让你超过20个人类扫到销商20个人类店，靠着真的钱啊，确保在什么代购可得到。我们看到这儿，这个货车大钱中，就作为在全球最新代理商规范逃过去的前兆，光小的一个房子，光在货的价格，它是在原价而它是多少的来着？它的是了，这样就要说回我们之前提到的那个问题了。为什么一大车的奢侈品比保险公司的索赔价值要远远低于其本身的价值呢？这里面相当实在的情况，压根儿就拿不出什么正经发票，一个人哪怕是在小姐姐和太太代入大代入后，还是觉得靠谱之身，哪怕是火眼金睛的孙悟空啊，就可能被骗掉不少。中国经济上代购有3大经典话术，大家多少做好了。知识跟智慧，前2年首先呢，就是靠谱装备验货，代购的保险验那么提到了对客气的服务，我们的包包这样才可以被人的那个货物价格严重影响，因为大部分都是出口的消费假货，说价值150万，根据一些网上的爆料，很大小姐中国的大网这样卖假货的事情，还能吸引一些真的商务游客口口相传给他打广告，还有代购呢会开出一条知假卖假的赛道，把代工厂的单或者是爱马仕相结合，号称仿的7、8个几百上千块钱，看在自己买的很多拿到手还有包邮，义务小商品市场欢迎。比方说哪怕消费者反诈意识，站在标准高手的黑心代购，早已能赚了大钱，而且最靠谱，可能说到这儿啊，就有同学会问了，这又是发票作假，又是有甚至还有专门搭口来开视频，这些代购为什么要掌握？对不对？
正高层办法已经朝人命的代价。那您知道吗？卖假奢侈品包包的人能够达到惊人的800%。
Post-humanity, transhumanity, the apocalypse even, could look like. It's an investigation into what it means to steal, to take, to replace, to colonize, to conquer. Along the way, we'll learn what AI really is, how it works, and what it can teach us about our intelligence, about ourselves as humans, turning some historical and philosophical giants along the way.
Tempo of modern living are increasing at an ever-accelerating rate. Without organization, without systems, the result will be chaos.
Because we have this idea that intelligence is this abstract, transcendent, disembodied thing, something unique and special. But we'll see how intelligence is much more about the deep past and the far, far future, something that reaches out powerfully through bodies, through infrastructure, through the concrete, empirical world. Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google,
is a sort of freedom fighter who's kind of going to save the Western world. She has this choice, and it's quite difficult because Paul Henry, I think, is a very boring actor. And Humphrey Bogart is kind of sexy and interesting. But she does the right thing when she goes with the man who's going to save the Western world, and he needs her support, so she lays her duty lies. But that's the poignancy of the plot.
The name for this witness is Victor Laszlo. You're getting on that plane.
Understand? What about you?
I'm staying here with him till the plane gets safely away.
You're not like
You said I would keep the thinking for both of us, well, I've done a lot of it since then. It all adds up to one thing. You're getting on that plane with Victor where you belong.
You need the kind of heartbreak to know that she's done the right thing, and Rick knows she's doing the right thing. It would have been terrible if she'd stayed with him. The film would not be nearly as memorable, I think.
Inside of us, we both know you belong with Victor. It's part of his work, the thing that keeps him going. When that plane leaves the ground and you're not with him, you feel better. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon, for the rest of your life.
What about us?
No.
Tell me about Wilder and Lubitsch and where they fit in the great kind of evolution of love triangle movies.
Well, I know Billy Wilder had a poster on his wall, or a notice on his wall saying, "What would Lubitsch do?" Lubitsch is the master of the love triangle.
Now we have some fun. Back to Paris.
To the same old studio?
The same old duck and wood.
Designed for women, Miriam Hopkins has to choose between Frederick March and Gary Cooper. I mean, lucky girl, God. And she concludes, well, why not both? And it ends with a sort of ménage à trois, with everybody really happy with the arrangement, which is quite rare and probably was quite shocking at the time.
Boys, this is very important. There's one thing that has to be understood.
I know. Yes, we know. It's a gentleman's agreement.
What's your own favourite love triangle film?
I'll tell you what my unfavourite is.
Go ahead.
Sleepless in Seattle.
But man, that's a comedy classic that people love. Why do you hate it?
I hate it because Meg Ryan, she's engaged to be married to Bill Pullman, and she hears this guy on the radio and just dumps Bill Pullman and goes across the country to stalk Tom Hanks, basically. I just hate Meg Ryan, except it confirmed that there is your person in it.
Are we back there? What about the past couple of days? They happen, you know?
I know that they happened, but they were also very irresponsible.
So you make love to me, and then you go back to your house. Is that your plan? We're gonna test out So, since the notebook, Nick Sparks film adaptations have become something that everybody knows and everyone's familiar with.
Yeah.
That wasn't the case when you were putting the film together. So how did The Notebook come together?
So The Notebook is actually Nick's first novel. It was not the first movie made. People want to remember it was the first film made. They were quicker than we were. But The Notebook was his first novel. I read it in galley form. I fell madly in love with it. It wasn't yet published. It wasn't yet a phenomenon in the publishing world. I pushed very hard at the time. I said, please, I love this. It's important. It will be something. I know it's got a thing to it. It's not a literary piece of material, but it is an emotional piece of material and a populist piece of material. Which is quite honestly, when I met Nick shortly thereafter, after securing the rights, he said that that's really what he set out to do. Nick had studied what worked, what made a novel popular. He set out to write a popular novel, not as cynical as that. The story is actually very personal. It's really a story of his then wife's grandparents.
The way you look, everything.
You look different too, but in a good way.
You're kind of the same though.
Yeah?
What?
House. It's beautiful.
I'll tell you, I don't know if it's a dirty little secret, but the truth is, I watched the movie last night for the first time since 20 years ago.
Going back to the movie after all that time, what did it like having it?
The joy of it for me was seeing the chemistry of the two of them hold up so beautifully. But the fun of the movie, the surprise to me, and the thing that I forgot was that it's delightfully awkward and uncomfortable in moments, and not weirdly not cliche at all. You know, there's funny, weird, quirky things about their relationship when they're young people, and the way they fall in love, and the way they sort of relate to one another, just the silly laying down in the middle of the street and dancing in the middle of the street, and the awkwardness of it, which is, I think, one of the things that's so charming about it, because it's very disarming.
My favourite novel of all time is The Great Gatsby, and I know I'm not the first person to say this, but clearly there is a very strong Gatsby thread in the Notebook, because there's the story of her falling in love with the person who's, you know, he's not the right social place for that to happen, but he's got the dream of the place that he's building, and then she ends up with the other. And there is a lot of Gatsby and Daisy and Tom Buchanan in that. Were you aware of that when you were making the film?
There were certain touch points for us in the making of the film. Gatsby is one of them. The Way We Were is one of them. Love Story is one of them. Those are sort of all of the touch points for us. Those sort of movies that are set in a moment of American promise and yearning and longing, innocence, in a way.
I'm a big horror movie fan, and horror movies are my favourite thing, and I love Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I love The Exorcist. Nick Sparks film adaptations are my guilty pleasure. They are my, I don't care who knows it, they are my go-to place, and just, you know, but of all of them, The Notebook is different. It is the one that has really endured, that has really found its audience. What's the key to its success?
God, I don't know. I do think casting is a big piece of that. I really do. I do think the magic that was Ryan and Rachel is a huge part of it. And so to me, that's why it's endured. I think there's something that is aspirational about the Noah and Allie relationship that endures.
One of the accolades that the film got was the award for Best Screen Kiss. Does that speak to the chemistry of the film? Because I think that the Love Triangle movie is at its best when it is, do the maths with this,
You need another key stage too, do you want me to
Yeah, go on.
Okay, well, if it's best, if I know what you're about to say, when it's an equilateral triangle, right? When all the sides are saying, like, as opposed to an isosceles triangle, when two sides are longer.
So you don't want an isosceles love triangle, you want an equilateral love triangle. Okay, and whilst we're doing technical definitions, Something Was, I love Something Was, great film, brilliant to hear Anne talk about it. Is it technically a love triangle film? Because she's not in love with Ray Liotta's psychotic husband.
No.
She's
not. She's desperately trying to
She's
escape him. Yeah, and Jeff Downs is one of the means by which she's trying to escape him. Yeah, no, that's a very, very
very short side of that triangle.
And do you think that the fact that Anne was comparing screwball comedies and film noir as two sides of what the love triangle is, does that really tell us that that's what the genre is about? On the one hand, there is horror and disaster and murder and death. On the other side, there is just comedy and absurdity, but they're all telling the same story.
Yeah, I actually think it is a genre. I think it's a kind of plot device, or more than a plot device. It's something that can exist in all these different films. And I guess what decides the genre is how the love triangle is resolved. So I love her description of Design for Living as the end of that love triangle being why not both?
Yes.
What I love Yellow's in anyway, when the love triangle is very practical as well. It's still very modern, but it was 1932 when that came out. And then there's, in a disaster movie it might be why not explode the building, or that's the end result, or sink the ship. Yeah.
So it's also interesting that in that conversation about the Notebook, Gap came up, which of course is for me one of the great love triangle stories, but it has to end the way it does, has to end with Tom and Daisy together, because Gap really cannot be fulfilled. We also talked with Anne Wilson about the moral choices at the end of Casablanca. People have talked so much about how was Casablanca going to end. They thought for such a long time about who she was going to end up with. There is only one possible Casablanca.
Yeah, I think Casablanca is so great because it marries those two different endings that are often in tension in love triangle films. The sort of emotionally correct ending, which I would argue The Notebook goes with, over the narratively correct ending, which James Bond is doing, which doesn't go with it. But Casablanca, somehow they both feel like she could only ever have got back to her husband, both because that's the right thing to do, and it just makes the story completely in and out.
And you know that they did do rewrites trying that he was shot on the airfield, or they were trying to figure out a way, but in the end it was no. The only way it can work is that Humphrey Bogart is right. If she doesn't go on, she will regret it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but sometime in the future and for the rest of her life. It is the only possible ending, and it is the perfect love triangle ending.
That's all for this episode of Screenshot. Next episode with Kevin Costner's Horizon, currently in cinemas, and Beyonce's Cowboy Carter still going hard on all my playlists. We're exploring the world of the Western.
Until then, you can find all our episodes, including that Don't Look Now episode that I mentioned earlier on BBC Sounds.
And you can subscribe there too. Thanks for listening.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Screenshot was presented by Eleni Jones and Mark Kermode. The producer was Tom Wally. It's a Prospect Street production for BBC. After the news, Alex Forsyth presents Any Questions from Stevenage Arts and Leisure Centre with Lord Falconer, Professor Matt Goodwin, Layla Moran MP, Bobby Toynbee, and more minutes. But before that, let's take a look ahead to next week here at BBC.
We're all overloaded and overwhelmed by information. We live in a tidal wave of data coming at us constantly.
Is the internet age an information crisis?
My suggestion is that the enormous information wave makes us anxious and angry.
Naomi Alderman explores this crisis by examining parallel events in history.
And we look at the past to see what we can learn from it about the present and the future.
The Third Information Crisis by Naomi Alderman. News Radio 4 and BBC Sounds. Monday to Friday morning at 11. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has started appointing his new cabinet, the first Labour Prime Minister since Tony Blair. Rachel Reeves has been confirmed as the first female Chancellor. Angela Rayner is the Deputy Prime Minister. Wes Streeting is the Health Secretary, and Ed Miliband is the Energy Secretary. Keir Starmer promised to build what he called a government of service. Speaking outside 10 Downing Street after his party's landslide election win, he pledged to restore trust in politics. Baroness Hope Kennedy is a Labour member of the House of Lords and says that the new Prime Minister can act swiftly and decisively when he needs to.
I think he's capable of being very, very tough and making very difficult decisions and being quite firm and not really mindful about what has to be done. So yes, that at times will mean having to do the hard thing, and it will be tough on those who haven't come up to snuff, but who is rigorous, he's ruthless in the interest of getting the job done.
Labour's win was on the back of a dramatic collapse in the support for the Conservative Party. Rishi Sunak
responsibility for us. He said he would resign as party leader once a formal arrangement for finding a successor was in place. He describes Keir Starmer as a decent but spirited man and wished him well. The Democrats have won 71 seats for the party in the general election. They took many seats from leading Conservatives, in areas where the Tories were vulnerable. The Liberal Democrat leader Sir Davey said his party had swept the victory in seats from Land's End to Chinese. Football and the Euro 2024. Portugal are taking on France at their second quarter-final. Whoever goes through to the semis will face Spain, who have beaten host Germany 2-1 in extra time in the early BBC News.
And now Radio 4, it's time for Any Questions with Alex Forsyth.
Hello and welcome to Stevenage, a town part old and part new that sits in the middle of Hertfordshire, just 20 minutes or so from the
Dave Pine for Farmer Waters.
Lord Faulkner, can I ask you, in your heart of hearts, do you think Keir Starmer is a boring man, or is he maybe secretly a radical?
I know Keir Starmer well, and have known him well over a very long period of time. I know he is not boring. I know he is willing, and then 10% news that we heard before, to take tough measures when it's necessary. Because he is not political, irresponsible, doubting, that does not make him boring. It makes him difficult to be the prime minister of the country. No, I don't think we'll see a mass endorsement actually of the kind of politics that Labour put forward. It sounds odd to say that given the size of the majority that we see today. If you look at actually what happened at this election, the Labour Party really stood still. Its vote went up by less than a percentage point. It actually got support in Wales, made some big gains in Scotland.
But it went from a massive loss to 170 plus.
Yeah, but the real story of this election was the complete repudiation of the Conservative Party. It was a punishment election. Now, when I look at the fact that combined support for the two big parties collapsed to one of the lowest levels we've seen since our two party system emerged, when I look at support for the Greens and Reform and independent candidates, and when I look at turnout falling to historically low levels, I don't see a country that's actually comfortable with people what government are willing to do to tackle that. And if I may add one other point, of course it's been incredibly turbulent few years and people got completely fed up with the Tory psychodrama. But do remember, we've had COVID, we've had the invasion of Ukraine, we've had a catastrophic rise in energy prices. Part of government is endlessly having to respond to unexpected and unpredictable. We've had a hell of a lot of that in the past 5 years, and I have no reason to believe the world is going to become boring and calm and steady.
Laila Moran, as you sit there and look at the new makeup of Parliament, obviously you're going to be looking across now at the Labour government as opposed to the Conservative government you faced for a long time, but you will be flanked by 71 Lib Dems. I wonder, what are you going to do with them? Are you going to be pushing Keir Starmer to defold us, as David Willett suggests he might have to? I mean, well, first of all, yeah, 71, possibly 72, there's a recount going and we think we might get that one too. And it's just an extraordinary thing. I mean, it's boring. I think the Lib Dems have had the most fun in this election campaign. I think by a long shot. The only ones that went on a roller coaster. Only ones that went on I was really sad to be invited onto that. And look what happened. You know, we went into the last Parliament with 11 MPs. We've come out with 71, 72. It's extraordinary. Most of which, though, linking to what people have said before, coming from the south to the southwest. And the thing that I heard the most, and I think I travelled to a good dozen meetings of the time, were people saying they are done with the shenanigans. They are done with the chaos. And it started actually under Boris Johnson. It started before before Ukraine, like to blame a lot of living crisis. It was this idea that sort of completely out of touch, not wanting to deal with the real problems that people were facing. And that is part why we see the so-called Conservative Party, but still a Labour Party. I mean, I joined the Lib Dems when it was their government, in part because it's corrupt, And I think what we are going to be able to do in Parliament, as the Tories continue to fight like rats in a sack, they're about to go on this journey about who they are in a sort of existential way. They may well be the official opposition, but I think you'll find the Liberal Democrats will be the effective opposition. I think that's absolutely right. I think it's absolutely right, and I think we should absolutely celebrate that the Dems have got possibly one nation together. Look at the way politics moves. Look at the Labour Party. Look at the Dems. Look at the number of progressives in all of the other parties. It's so outweighed this is a major move towards the Social Democratic future, and I think it's very exciting. I think it's a real free trade, and I think it's the end of the past. I think it's the end of it. Charlie Faulkner?
The price will come quite quickly. So, for example, planning reform is absolutely the driver of growth. When you introduce planning reform, you will find people who think it's good in the abstract then become much more uncertain about it when they think it may affect where they live in a beautiful part of England. Very many of Labour's new colleagues come from the country that it will probably be against planning reform. I'm looking for Labour to give us 100% support if he hears about growth. That's the big
And this is really interesting, right? Because this is actually why I am not a member of the Labour Party. There's a fundamentally different way that you approach house building with the Liberals. Okay, and bottom up, not top down. I don't want to get too stuck into the debates that we are having in Parliament. Okay, I don't want to get too stuck into this. Charlie, can I ask you a very, very brief thought, if I may? I said at the beginning that you were a minister in the Blair government. Does this feel like that?
It felt like that today. The build-up to it was quite different. It's a much briefer time that we build up to. But today we see here in Downing Street, talking with real passion about what we do, that same sense of humility and opportunity that we didn't know what we should be doing. We were absolutely determined to do the right thing by the nation. And that thought, I thought, here conveyed so well today, and that was so like the 2nd of May 1997.
Thank you all. Let's bring in our second question, which comes from Emil. Hello. Okay.
So there was a very are they going here? The one nation story, no room for them in your service.
No, that is part of the Conservative family, but effectively 15% of the Conservative family today. The bigger issue for the Conservatives, look at this for a global level. The Conservatives that do best around the world, Europe, America and elsewhere, are the Conservatives that understood there needs to be a very different brand of conservatism. Liberal conservatism of a David Cameron brand, George Osborne brand, it's gone. That's the early 2010s. Voters don't want that anymore. They rejected that. They want something that will give them security.
Lena Moran. Well, first of all, I don't really want this to sound funny. Just to be clear. I mean, I really don't. This is a party your party would want to coalition with. Well, yeah, and look what happened to us. So, and now we're back. So, I mean, a serious point though, I really reject national change because my concern about the way that conservatism has gone elsewhere in the world, that we're also increasingly divided countries where families don't talk to each other, where you live in one part of the country because you want to be surrounded by people who think like you, and you don't dare go to the other side. And I'm sorry, I think Britain's better than that. I genuinely think Britain's better than that, and we can do better. So I don't know how they bounce back, it's for them, but what I do hope is that they're not going to turn this country into some kind of basket case, shouting match, divisive country. And until, if they think they're going to do that, then I think the Dems will take the game. Probably find this. The Conservative Party typically being so practically dry. They really have it. Boris Johnson, Joseph, Minister for the Constitution, is saying this today, that the idea that there is a kind of horror of wokeness
people are no longer anti-gay. They're no longer all of
I didn't say that. Well, I said what we're doing is institutions, what we're teaching them has no basis in science. If they come from you, has shown what's happening in the NHS, you don't want to talk about it, that's fine.
But then the gender is accepting that the noise is everything to talk about. Look at that.
What's the point of the thing that sex-based right and not very important? You can't just brush it under the carpet and say, this is culture war politics. They care about issues, they really important.
I care about issues too, and I think that that's a key to the idea that you have to have that real effectiveness for culture war to try and get to the other side. Just not true. It's still a couple of years in Africa. Places where women can be raped and but the needle is hot topic. I really think that we are not actually looking at we have a massive story press. And you look at the Mail and you look at the Telegraph, they are on another planet, the Conservative Party. How will they respond? How should they? Can you see an alliance?
Well, there is indeed genuine popular concern about immigration. I have to say it is often driven by underlying factors that are not themselves immigration. It's people thinking, what are the pressures on housing? What are the pressures on the NHS? So in other words, if you track back,
有冇睇晒你頭先出咗去一大之後有冇再睇德國嗰場波？好似好勁。OK， 佢最尾臨尾入，佢整個 England 嘅講笑，但係咪好睇啲啊？好睇過 England 嗰場波。
Successive generation and the younger generation. And my view is that some of the absolute basics of good policy, helping people get themselves on the house,
我見到佢 attack 好多喎，黐線，20幾30個 attack 嗰兩邊，賣門嗰隻，係啊，兩邊都係。跟住，即係最尾輸嗰陣時，冇睇到。我就想問你點解有個名牌先喎？咁你而家有冇睇？而家有冇睇？哦，係咪 Portugal 係咪撳住番薯打定係唔係佢 possession 呢個 Portugal 70%嘛，3%，但係依家去到係薯條，我哋食咩？我覺得佢好似唔係，佢今日屙咗兩次，佢今日屙咗兩次屎，佢 OK， 流流地咯，第二次係水嚟。第二次咧，佢企咗喺度，跟住低我魚，跟住我見到佢開始喺度拗屁股，本來唔想理佢，跟住算啦，幫佢換，跟住見到哇好水啊，跟住就即刻就等佢沖，佢沖咗涼，跟住之後又跟住就我拎走嗰盤咧，等佢自己肉乾，佢係咁行，自己肉乾。
Doesn't mean that I think that because in democracy that you've got huge disparities in numbers of people who are voting for one party versus another. So the Greens of Reform versus Labour Party in this election, there's a huge difference in how many votes. I think it's 1 million voters who need to vote Reform, and I don't know, it's a tiny proportion. Well, let me just give you the numbers, for example. The Lib Dem vote share was just over 12%, and you've got 71 maybe 72 seats. Reform got 14% of the vote share and 5. And my basic principle here is I think when you have an election,
you should get the government that you vote for, the parliament that you voted for, with a plethora of ideas, with a pluralist background to our democracy, and we should be able to, in parliament, using our mechanisms, sort it all out between us, and then get scrutiny of those parties and so on and so forth. And that is the fundamental reason why Liberal Democrats have put electoral reform in that manifesto, but it's not enough. I just want to make that really clear. When I was during this election knocking on doors, the number of people who say to me, there is no point in voting, they're all the same, it doesn't matter, and that's in part because they tended to live in places where their vote didn't count, they were safe seats, but also they felt that the big issues that were in the country weren't being dealt with. So you've got to have good governance, you've got to have good local champions who are going to deal with the issues.
Combining knowledge of the ancient world and his photographic memory, he became an eminent dealer of ancient gemstones. But those unique attributes eventually entangled him in our story.
Here we are. This is the very early.
Itai starts digging through old messages on his laptop. Messages from more than a decade ago.
This is 19th of April 2020. Dear Roger, I hope you're doing well. I'm new.
It's an email exchange with his friend Rolf Bonkier, a London-based antiquity dealer.
That is apparently the
See, Rolf has a music life. An elderly man has contacted him out of the blue by email, claiming to have inherited dozens of gems. Rolf starts buying them at very low prices, and in turn, selling them on to Itai.
And the story was that the vendor's grandfather had acquired a large stock full of gems in an estate sale in the north of England in the early 20th century. And that sounded plausibly enough.
Do you remember how much you paid?
Yes. One I paid £1,000, and another one I paid, I think, 500. And I thought it was quite a bargain. I could probably afford twice as much.
It's a good deal for both of them, not a friend's forge. Rolf makes some easy sales, and Itai buys some objects he loves at great prices. But this is where it gets weird. Every few months, Rolf's source, the man who inherited the gems, gets back in touch and says he's just found more gems. Rolf asks Itai if he's interested, and of course, Itai, being Itai, he always is.
The last 7 times you told Rob that is all there is. Then a few months pass and then you get back and, oh, I opened another door and found another group of these gems.
Don't you just hate it when that happens? It's starting to sound too good to be true. But the gems themselves are the real deal, and some are very valuable. So where are they coming from? Itai decides to investigate, starting with the name Rolf says he was given by the seller. Paul Higgins, a name you'll be hearing a lot.
Rolf is estimated to be about 30 years of age. I then went into the public record to find this man. There was no Paul Higgins born in the interval between 1920 and 1940. I said every Paul Higgins.
He checks marriage certificates, death certificates, birth certificates. He can't find a Paul Higgins who fits the bill. As for the grandfather Higgins says he inherited the gems from, no sign of him either.
There was no smoking gun or not, but I did everything I could as he wrote to actually check the story.
There was one final day to check this guy out though.
I arranged with Rob that Rob could arrange a physical meeting with him and talk.
A face-to-face conversation would put their suspicions at bay. Shortly,
just before that was about to happen, the vendor then sadly passed away.
Out of the blue, Rob tells Itai a man claiming to be Paul Higgins' son has emailed to say his father has passed away.
That was very inconvenient for us, but in hindsight, it was very convenient for Paul Higgins that he passed away, because that way, of course, he avoided the meeting Rob.
But did you believe the story was true? Did you believe the old gentleman had died?
Yes, I'm not convinced. I actually thought this is most likely true.
The trail goes cold. Itai is still buying and selling ancient gems, but he's found a new hunting ground, the online auction website eBay.
The internet has turned out to be by salvation by excavating on the internet that I can make these ancient discoveries.
One day, he spots a new vendor selling exactly what he likes, ancient gemstones at bargain prices. He's excited.
Oh, I got one for 15 pounds.
And how much do you think it was worth?
45,000
The seller's username is Sultan1966. In direct messages, he calls himself Paul, and Itai can see from his receipts that his surname is Peace. Paul Peace. Pretty similar to the mysterious and now deceased Paul Higgins, right? But Itai thinks nothing of it. I know I said he's a detective, but he clearly hasn't yet got into his stride. And anyway, the names are pretty common. This new seller also says he inherited the gems from his grandfather. Isn't Itai suspicious?
After the grandfather's name, this man actually existed.
So, he's done his usual checks, and this time, the story holds up. Itai continues buying the gems. If you're feeling confused, I don't blame you. That's two people with similar names and similar backstories selling similar gems. Paul Higgins over email, and now Paul Peace on eBay. 2 years later, in early August 2016, Itai is again searching for gems online.
I was at home, I saw it listed on eBay, and then I thought, hang on.
He notices a new offer from Sultan 1966. It's a piece of a grey and white Roman cameo, a type of gemstone where the carved image on the front is raised.
It shows the Roman fertility god Priapus.
Priapus is certainly one of the more memorable Greek Roman gods, with his oversized appendage permanently standing to attention. But Itai says he remembers it for another reason.
I thought, this is strange, I've seen this piece before. It was a photo of it on eBay, and it was a line drawing in the Byzantine catalog, but it's still wrong again.
Itai recognizes it from the same 1920s catalogue that we heard about earlier. As you might be noticing, he knows the drawings in that book very well. He's detached a huge safe, although it turns out not that safe.
The real point is how the museums allow themselves to accumulate material. One, they don't display. Two, they never catalogue. Three, they never photograph. Four, they probably don't want. Why? Just why?
The museum's ropey record keeping is why I'm speaking to Malcolm today. And he's brought something to show me.
I bought this document you might be interested in. I acquired the item.
The light!
It's a well-engraved Roman gem with a portrait.
The light!
It resembled Augustus on a nice stone, and I saw it as a sensible price it was worth acquiring. I was curious, I wanted it.
Malcolm holds up a picture of a beautiful gem he fell in love with and bought. In fact, it's a piece of a gem, olive green in colour with a young man's face in profile. But a year after he bought it, Malcolm receives an unexpected message from a man he doesn't know, one Itai Goodell.
He said it seemed to be one of the gems in the collection of the British Museum.
Was your initial reaction, oh my goodness, this might have been stolen?
That's a suspicious. Very suspicious. I did check straight away, and I found it on the museum website. Now clearly, if it was that gem, there's no way I could own it. It was removed, somehow.
So how did Itai know? It turns out he had also considered buying the olive green gem. He turned it down, but it stuck in his mind. That photographic memory again. You see, the man depicted on Malcolm's gemstone has a very distinctive hairstyle.
He has some thompson hair, it comes out, which is very uncharacteristic for a Roman hairstyle.
As we heard, Itai identified the piece after seeing it in a book about gems held in museums around the world. It was when he alerted Malcolm.
I was really distraught. I thought, damn, what a bloody nuisance. Your hand in stolen property.
heard how Itai became suspicious about sellers with similar names and about precious gemstones going cheap on eBay. But it was a feeling. He had nothing concrete, no smoking gun. But now, this olive green gemstone is the final puzzle piece. It's going to help Itai uncover a trail of clues that will lead to the eBay seller's real identity. Itai Goodell had come tantalisingly close to buying a British Museum gemstone from an eBay seller called Sultan 1966. That was the grey and white cameo with the god of fertility Priapus carved on it. But Itai never actually got his hands on that cameo.
Well, he said he has made a mistake in offering it on eBay. It actually belonged not to him but to his sister, and she didn't want him to sell it.
Itai felt sure the object belonged to the museum, but kept his suspicions to himself. Without the cameo in his possession, who would believe him? But Malcolm's gem is different. He has the physical gemstone. And if Itai can trace the path of this one gem, it will surely lead him to the thief. All that time spent researching elaborate backstories, scouring public records for the identities of dead grandfathers, could it be as simple as asking where Malcolm bought the gem? Turns out, it was from a friend of Itai's, antiquity dealer Rolf Bonkier. Malcolm contacts Rolf to get to the bottom of it.
I did ask him where did it come from. He had acquired it from eBay.
And who did Rolf get it from? Sultan 1966, the eBay seller who listed the grey and white Priapus cameo. So that's now the second gem from the same seller that Itai's linked to the British Museum. You can tell something is seriously wrong. He searches online for the first gem, the grey and white cameo depicting the god Priapus, a search he's done many times before, but he sees something new, something that stops him dead in his tracks.
I saw the same piece published on the British Museum website.
It's the piece that Itai had seen on eBay, but the listing now says it's in the museum, and there's a modern photograph.
The photo could have been 10 years old, max of 20 years old.
This was electrifying.
So the story told by the eBay vendor was a lie, and if I couldn't count on that, I couldn't rely on anything. And then it struck me that since it was a beauty photo, this was in all probability unique. And that meant that the piece was quite possibly still at large within the British Museum.
This undermines everything Sultan 1966 had told Itai about inheriting the cameo from his grandfather. Itai feels sure he's found his thief.
That was the one thing that made the whole edifice of lies come tumbling down.
How did you feel when that dawned on you?
I was shocked. I was totally shocked.
Itai has identified the eBay seller who offered at least 2 gemstones that came from the British Museum. But how is he getting them? Believing the dead grandfather story, Itai had bought hundreds of gems from the same seller over the years. You'll remember the confusion with the different, though uncannily similar names. Itai had accepted the story that it was just a coincidence. But now, energised by his recent discovery, Itai sets to work going back through the paper trail.
When I went through my record, I found a PayPal receipt, but he was not called Paul Higgins there. He was from the synthetic. And a PayPal receipt has to be attached to a real bank account. So this had to be his new name.
过来上班了，过来上班，我女儿，我车过来了。
哦。
3 months after Itai sent his email, Malcolm Hay is invited to the British Museum to return the
我明天谁来上班？
the one that Itai had identified.
明天你女的？
啊？ 真的。
Malcolm's puzzle.
明天晚送
And at least now he'll find
孙子过来。
孙子过。
They met with the front entrance. They didn't have the gem, of course.
You had the gem.
I had their gem.
Did they ask you for contact details of the person that you bought it from so they could investigate further?
你过来上班可以在我家里带我孙子过来啊，我要拿钱给你了。
I confess I don't know what to make of this.
说一遍，再说一遍。
Has already shared.
我孙子给我带过来上班，可以。
带过来。
可以吗？
他去哪里？
啊？
就是现在去哪个地方？
是啊。
什么时候要去到他那边？
啊？
几点要去到他那边？
你几点过来上班？几点？可以吗？可以不可以啊？
可能可以吧，我不知道，我不知道我在家有什么东西要用。
钱都拿一半给你了，3半给你。
Nearly 5 months after contacting them, Itai receives an email from the museum's deputy director, Jonathan
我
Williams.
在想什么时候要我在想什么时候要开车。
The museum deputy director writes that all of the objects are accounted for and that Itai's claims are wholly unfounded.
可以跟我讲一下了，跟我孙子讲。
我怎么跟你说？我跟谁说可以跟你说？我有你电话吗？我是没有电话。
我这电话你打你电话是知道，我又不知道自己电话多少。你等一下，我电话你拿来打你电话，你知道了。啊？
不是，你说我说我的电话给你。
不是啊。
啊。
等一下，你的到了我家的，你的电话，我电话都要打你电话，就知道我什么电话号码。
那你现在这个电话？
啊。
我现在跟你说我电话号码怎么样？
哦，跟你会，你说。
077。
那这个不能讲，我没有开机了。077是吗？4。
等下，不是，我一般用英文的，用待会中文要想一下。
你等一下到了我家，我电话打了，你自己就知道自己电话号码，打了就知道吧，可以吧？
I remember so clearly getting a phone call where I was at home. Christmas, and I guess for me that's when the
碰车，
我碰了还会，很严重了。
Program was presented by Basil and Well, looking ahead to tomorrow evening, it's hard to believe, but the old town of New McCall's folk classic on Salford is 75 years old. The new archive on form, Mike Sweeney tells the story of this famous song, and there must be a new recording of the song by widow Peggy Seeger. Collaboration with the BBC Philharmonic, which also includes Lucy Rice. The old town at 75. Tomorrow night. Well, just ahead of the world tonight with Sean May, a quick look at how the weather forecast. Tonight, much of the good weather as it is showers are always started rain. Northern Scotland will also be central and southern Scotland will be mostly dry with clear spells in places. Tomorrow, most of the UK will have unsettled conditions with showers, some heavy and persistent. There will also be a risk of thunder, particularly in the breezy south. And brighter. Meanwhile, on Sunday, many places will start out dry and sunny spots with scattered showers will spread from the west and become locally heavy and thundery. On Monday, the southwest will be cloudy.
走到那边走了，会这边走。
这个叫我就会走。
忘记了，我在这边没有看了，刚刚没有看。
Hello and welcome to the world tonight. I'm Sean Lady at 9 to 10.
the new Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has promised a period of what he calls national renewal. I invite you all to join this government concern in the mission of national renewal. We'll be asking how Sir Keir will govern and who's made it into his top team tonight. Jeremy Corbyn, his predecessor, defied electoral history, holding his seat as an independent with nearly 50% of the vote. He'll join me live. Also on the world tonight, the Conservatives have their smallest number of MPs at a general election in modern times, but the recriminations have already begun.
I've watched colleagues in the Conservative Party strike poses, write inflammatory op-eds and say stupid things.
I think that there were issues with changing the leader.
Perhaps it's that we've not been conservative enough.
Tory activists join me to discuss what's next for their party. And after just the fourth change in the UK governing party in 45 years, we reflect on this seismic moment with the distinguished historians Sir Anthony Selby and Sir Simon Sharp. It's not lacking charisma, reverb, and Tony Blair. The country is ready for the
Wow. 係啊，
No one can accuse
這樣開車。
That's all after the BBC News breakfast this evening.
Oh.
New Prime Minister using their first speeches down in
正常的。
对，送上的。
Keir Starmer promised stability
很
and
辛苦在
cooperation.
车哈。
Government concerned rebuilding
怕見你得。
standing in the same spot and apologising to the country and defeated Conservative candidates after leading the party to its worst ever general election.
呢個電腦卡啲係公嘅吧？
Keir Starmer had appointed senior members of his ministerial team. Most of the jobs they shadowed in
呢
opposition.
個肯定跟我車來我做，不肯定的我就我女兒開早一點開的。
OK。
你肯定開的嘛？肯定過來帶我。
我要看一下有多久，我在这边再去店。
不一樣的嘛？
看有多久。如果太長時間嘅我就不行，看一下。
啊？
我要去你这边，然后去店嘛，跟我家去店不同時間就。
哦，佢咪是去不要了哈。
然後我看一下那個時間。
看那時間你今天玩那個我講了，不行了，太晚了。
我停車之後看一下，我現在看不到。
哦。你上班在哪里上班啊？上班在哪里？
没有，我家。
哦，你家啦？哦。
对。
哦，家跟这个不一样。
我家。
没有诉求是吗？
去店跟从我家去你那边再去店。
哦。
我会看一下差多少。
看差多长时间的。
哦，对啊。
啊，你老婆上班了，你儿子给谁带了？你爸爸带的嘛？
啊？
你老婆你在中国店上班啊？但你儿子谁报了？
我儿子。
谁带的？
谁带？有2天去那個 nursery 然後有2天去那個 nursery 就是幼兒園咁樣就是給人家看，給付錢啊的，然後3天在家我。
一天多少？
一天多少？我真。
你爸爸不會帶的？
他不會，他想了，他不會帶。應該好像60方，我不記得，40多60方。
你看了，有時間沒有時間就不要了。
不是我，你打幾電話對吧？
diplomatic correspondent.
不是我电话你打了
Ukraine and
那
Gaza
边的
will
就
be
知
on
道
the。agenda when Keir Starmer joins NATO leaders in Washington in 4 days' time. It'll be a chance for the Prime Minister to assess Joe Biden's performance and ponder perhaps the possibility of dealing with a very
那
different
就看了有时间嘛，跟我讲一下。
UK's role as a cheerleader for Ukraine could be trickier if Donald Trump returns to the White House.
后面也得溜溜，
Potential
三
challenges
个
in
溜，
Europe
所以
too.
我
Labour speaks of a
我
reset.
孙子
But
慢慢
Marine
也
Le
后
Pen's
面也
right-wing
三个溜
national。rally wins the second round of
啊，不
France's
是溜，
parliamentary
哦，
elections.
六
On
八
Sunday,
六哈。
cooperation on issues like migration could be more complicated.
看了参
Climate change, international development, and China all demand attention and present dilemmas. Sir Patrick Vallance, who is the Chief Scientific Advisor to the government for the COVID pandemic, has been appointed Emirates Minister of State for Science. Sir Patrick will also be made a peer. He's been in support of Labour's manifesto pledge to set the UK's own green energy policy. In other news tonight, the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has met Vladimir Putin in Moscow on a visit that's been criticised by other European leaders. Mr. Orban is the European Union's only head of national government to maintain warm ties with Russia since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine 2 years
差不
ago.
多的嘛。
From Moscow, Steve Rosenberg.
Just days after his country had assumed the 6-month rotating presidency of the EU,
然后80号这个
Prime Minister
80号门牌80号，他们这个， OK， 那我
可以的呀，我拿3磅给你。
现在可以，
可以的呀。
如果不可以再跟你说，可以吗？
不可以，你早一点说，晚一点我没有人车。
什么时候之前要送
？3点之前。
3点之前，好，OK。
The former nurse that her attempt to murder the infant known as baby Kane in February 2016 was another shocking act of calculated callous cruelty. And she imposed another whole life order, meaning that Effie is now serving 15 such terms. Fletcher shrugged, looked at the judge and said, I'm innocent, but she is taken back to the cells.
In football, we host Germany before that match of Europe. They were beaten 2-1 in their quarter-final game against Spain, who scored the winning goal in the final minutes of extra time. France is currently facing Portugal in the second quarter-final. Scoreless after 90 minutes, and the goal is decided at extra time. Tomorrow, England will play Switzerland and Netherlands.
Jim, thank you very much. You're listening to World Tonight. I'm Sean Ray. 100 years after the election of the first short-lived Labour government, Sir Keir Starmer takes office as Prime Minister with the biggest majority since 1987 in high-handed security. 33.5% of the votes cast, and the biggest number of Labour MPs ever elected. With 71 MPs, the Liberal Democrats have the largest number of MPs as a third party has achieved in 101 years. The Conservatives have never elected so few MPs, 31, fewer than in the Labour last time, 37, fewer than in the Liberal one, 70. People have to be functioning talent, designed series of efforts to provide segment of their summer, Sunak pays the manner. Now is transferred. One of the most remarkable things about Britain is just how unremarkable it is that 2 generations after my grandparents came here with them, I could become Prime Minister, and that I could watch my 2 young daughters light Diwali candles on the steps in Downing. We must hold true to that idea of who we are. That vision of kindness, decency, and tolerance that has always lived in the Well, after accepting the King's commission for the Hebrew State, Keir, now Prime Minister, paused on the threshold of number 10 to address the nation. Now our country has hosted this crisis. 4 days for national renewal and return to politics and public service. But the gap between the sacrifices made by people and the service they receive from politicians through this thing would lead to a weariness in the heart of a nation. A draining away of the hope, the spirit, the belief they set up. So here and the key unity to a face of the election campaign. You have given us a clear message, and we will use it to deliver faith.
restore service of responsible quality. Every era of noisy performance, every activity of your life, has tonight come. All nations standing together again, facing down, as we have so often in our past, the challenges of an insecure world, committed to a calm and patient rebuilding. Some unity is undoubtedly needed, because both ways by the 1.5% in 2019, Labour companies second worst work a couple of unexpected elected defeats to make some late changes, or we came on air, I spoke out in the past, before the second Christmas. We're certainly trying to make a virtue of what to the aficionados might seem like an unsurprising cabinet appointment. Broadly speaking, those cabinet portfolio are now being something saved for those in the federal cabinet who weren't elected and didn't hold their seats. So kind of looking at the parliamentarian who's going to be Green Party in England, Wales, in Bristol Central, and say to no longer be present on critical social media and sport, and over that work we will the faces of the seat in Leicester. We could have opened it with Lady Sanders take on the camera. Beyond that, as I say, the names that do official roles as shadows, so most prominently, regularly, the first ever female for conferences like Cooper Community, Home Secretary, and Angela Reynolds, and the Deputy Prime Minister. What about some changes to how he was done? There isn't anything specific to no, I mean, the big one of them, you try to do it, by emphasizing the value of stability, and if you like, trying to return politics to a central crowd rather than having that. Now, let's see how that goes. I think it will help him that he has a whopping majority. Significant, but I'm not sure we're necessarily any the right reasons to say about more broadly his approach to government. And I guess the challenge of the big majority, like probably Prime Minister Howe, but the challenge of it is essentially to create an expectation of a capacity to deliver, particularly around some of the places that might not be like much easier with a big government. I mean, the other thing that I think is worth pondering, and it's really made me astonished as well, is they disputed that from like Boris Johnson writing his Norwich Daily Mail makes an argument that Labour support the exact phrase initially that is along the lines of 10 miles wide and 1 deep. That idea that we have a government with whopping majority, but where their share of the vote is pretty modest for any single party government, let alone one of this size. So, and that's an easy dynamic where people like putting on dominance that they can have at Westminster, and you can just think that their case here is that much more or and meanwhile we have a that has never been so divided new voices for security, in the sense that perhaps the left is more political, less loyal to the party, and it's never been so volatility is a new thing that more people and more women and more parents provide more often provide their vote for one of those to the left. So while you are still some side of the person who has right now particularly damaged tonight, and clearly was affording himself a smile and was already writing down into at lunchtime,
things really changed very quickly after Boris Johnson. Chris Mason, our political editor, were among the seats laid at one of the Conservatives' Wickham, Buckingham, last election member John Hare in 1950. His modern-day successor is Emma Reynolds, who lost her Wolverhampton seat in 2019, arguably second worst elected performance in Labour's history. Emma Reynolds, in that sense, you can sort of understand why people are saying, yes, it's a remarkable performance by Labour, but it can't really take anything for granted.
Well, if you said to me in December 2019 that we were going to secure one of the biggest majorities in British political history, I don't think I would have believed you. I don't think we can take away from Labour's achievement in the last 24 hours of this election. But yes, of course, we have to make sure that we build trust for British people in politics. Keir was talking earlier about putting country before party, and indeed we will have to make sure that we deliver on the priorities that we talked about during this election campaign, rebuilding our public services, boosting growth, and there's a whole range of other challenges we face on the world stage as well.
But when you look at the number of votes, the number of seats compared to the share of the vote, it's quite striking. I wrongly said at the start that this was Labour's biggest number of members. It wasn't. 97 was 418. 412 this time on 33.7%